Hi, and welcome back to yet another video. This is the 20th episode of the story about the time when Sasuke gives his sharingan eyes to Naruto on verge death in waves. Let's watch as Naruto Uzumaki, Uchiha takes world by storm. After you've finished watching, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. A dusty red moon floated over a small desert city in Kaze no Kuni and illuminated the quiet night with a soft glow. Anxiety gripped the samurai lining its wall as they stared into the darkness, only hearing soft clanks from men shifting nervously in their armor until a loud clicking sound drew their attention. A torch flared in the distance and revealed a man in strange green and black armor easily walking towards the fortified position with his left hand resting casually on the hilt of a sword strapped to his waist. He stopped about 100 feet away from the gate and called out, "Surrender this city to the forces of Lord Hido and be spared. If you choose to fight, no, we shall raze it to the ground and show no mercy." An older samurai with gray streaks lining his black hair that was pulled back in a tight bun stepped forward. The fires burning on top of the walls reflected off the man's polished tan armor while he confidently stared at the foreigner with his piercing brown eyes. "Never, we fight for Kaze-sama, and I promise you shall not take this city while a single one of us draws breath." The samurai cheered at his proclamation, but they stopped and the captain reconsidered his answer moments later when blue flames lit up 1,000 feet beyond the walls. The fires hovered in the air and illuminated two massive wooden ships floating above the earth that were both around 400 feet long and 70 feet tall without their masts. The messenger smirked arrogantly as he called out, "Just remember, we offered you a chance to survive," and turned away as a sea of torches lit up 50 feet behind him, revealing hundreds of men. The samurai captain cursed under his breath as cannons boomed in the distance, while knights that had snuck closer in the darkness used oversized crossbows to launch ceramic firebombs as well. He yelled out, "Take cover," before the cannonballs smashed into the walls, causing them to shake and leaving small craters with cracked spiderwebbing out, while the firebombs landed on the ramparts and streets behind them. The acrid smell of burning flesh filled the air as the commander yelled over the pained shrieks of his men, "Spread out along the wall, don't group up. Archers return fire." Samurai and towers along the wall countered with a volley of arrows as the invaders launched another barrage towards the city. The captain snarled as he watched his men push dead soldiers off the wall and called out more orders, "Pull the catapults forward and bring fire arrows up to the archery tower." Bulky camels pulled 3 large catapults forward as the cannons focused on the gates, leaving massive dents and twisting the hinges while the metal groaned in protest. The samurai leader feared his defenses would be breached before they could counter, but the old gates held until the camels got into position. "Load up oil bombs," he raised his sword and waited until the dark spheres were loaded, then slashed it down. "Fire!" The invaders scattered as the oil bombs smashed into the ground, killing some on impact, but dousing many more in a thick black liquid before flaming arrows lit up the night sky and ignited the combustible substance. The foreigners screamed as fires overtook them, but it instilled little hope in the defenders. The flames illuminated the battlefield and showed they were heavily outnumbered. The raids over the past few days forced the daimyo to spread his army thin to cover the area, and the captain didn't have enough men to hold out too long. The invaders had made steady progress to the wall, and the city didn't have anything that could reach the ships raining cannon fire onto the gate. The captain yelled out, "Load up the explosive shot." The men loaded 15-foot tan rocks that appeared to be patched together with exploding tags covering the outside. "Fire!" The catapults launched the boulders into the advancing men and it crushed many before breaking apart into pieces that flew around the battlefield, revealing the inside was covered with tags as well. A massive explosion scattered the invaders as the captain looked to his aide. "Did the message get sent out?" The shorter man wearing light leather armor nodded, "Yes sir." Right after that man walked forward. "Still, they usually hit 6 towns a night, so Sunagakure might be stretched thin." "You may be right, but I'm hoping they've concentrated their forces." The captain's leathery face grimaced as he watched some medics walk past mortally wounded men, ignoring their cries for help while lifting someone they could save. This is the first fortified position they've assaulted, and the few survivors from previous raids all said one ship attacked. He was cut off when the metal groaned loudly after another cannon barrage warped the gates. The captain could see a gap big enough for 2 men to fit through and was about to call for a defensive formation when a giant wall of sand rose up and deflected most of the next volley, but those that made it through had their momentum sapped and did no damage. The demoralized men stood up as hopeful whispers of "Gara-sama" were heard up and down the line. A cheer rang out from the beleaguered city as a deep voice calmly intoned, "Ryusa Bakaryu." Countless tons of sand rose up and moved towards the foreigners like a tidal wave as the ship's cannons boomed in an attempt to stall the attack, but they had no hope of slowing the tsunami and it crashed over the invaders. The Jinchuriki tried to block out the grateful cheers and placed his hands on the desert floor. Sabaku Taiso, Sand Waterfall Imperial Funeral. Screams were heard as the sand compacted, but Gaara still frowned. He could feel a sizable amount of pockets that didn't get crushed. The Chunin was about to add more pressure when he felt them collapse and dozens of glowing blue orbs appeared above ground with upwards of 10 soldiers in each. The redhead looked at the opposing army while the samurai captain yelled out orders from the wall, but before he could launch another jutsu, 4 men wearing shimmering black robes appeared with chakra-infused items in their hand. They began making wild motions with their arms in perfect coordination while chanting in a strange language, and Gaara could feel the energy building in the air around him. A large gray vortex appeared as the wizards continued their motions, and a 15-foot-tall creature emerged with black, ram-like horns on top of his head and bright red skin that stretched over his substantial muscles. Wisps of steam rose off its body as the devil let out a terrifying roar while waving an intimidating mace with an 8-foot-long shaft and a head split into 4 wickedly sharp blades. The beast wore nothing but a loincloth fastened by a skull nearly 3 times larger than a human's that had 3 large horns on its forehead, and his legs were thicker than Gaara's body with 24-inch human-like feet that had 5 curving black claws in front. It seemed like the creature wanted to use his dangerous weapon on the mages that summoned him, but as they finished their motions, a complicated seal appeared underneath the devil and spread up his skin before disappearing. When it was done, his jet-black eyes with tiny red pupils eagerly stared at the twisted gate while he slammed the weapon into the sand near his feet, turning it to glass. The beast let out another roar and smaller vortexes appeared around him, out of which rushed dozens of 4-foot-tall creatures with onyx skin, wickedly sharp claws, pure red eyes, bat-like ears, and wiry muscles covering their humanoid frame. The devilish horde rushed forward while the ships launched more cannonballs towards the city, which were stopped by Gaara. The monsters waved their weapons excitedly as the larger devil led the charge towards the city, and the green-armored messenger called out, "Retreat, we must deliver this information to our lord." The invaders allowed the fiendish army to pass them before dropping their torches and running towards the ships as the hovering blue fires were extinguished. Gaara didn't bother worrying about them and focused on the monstrosity bearing down on the gate with an army of devils at its back. The Kazekage's son lifted his arm as a fist of sand bigger than the massive red beast formed and smashed it to the back of the herd, crushing several smaller creatures under his weight. The devil pushed itself up using the corpses underneath it and saw the red-headed Jinchuriki staring at him with frosty green eyes while the samurai roared, rushing out of the damaged gates to fight the other monsters. The smoking devil looked absolutely savage as he smiled eagerly, revealing the oversized canines and sharp needle-like teeth lining his mouth, before he surprised Gaara by speaking in a deep, gravelly voice, "I sense something powerful about you. Something similar to me, yet somehow different at the same time. Don't insult me." The redhead lifted his palm towards the creature, "I'm far superior to you." The beast was surprised when Shukaku's head emerged from the desert floor before inhaling deeply while Gaara quietly said, "Futon, Rinkudan, drilling air bullet." The head launched a massive air blast that created a trench nearly 50 feet wide and sent the devil flying towards the retreating army, but it disappeared in a puff of black smoke before reappearing above the attack about 100 feet away from the Jinchuriki. The red-skinned creature landed and sprinted towards the Suna shinobi with a roar, covering ground at an alarming rate. Gaara warily watched the dangerous mace as his opponent lifted it above his head. He had seen the weapon turn sand into glass with one swing and didn't want to test its capabilities up close. Dozens of sand clones rose from the ground and charged forward, but whenever one got close the devil would hit it with his weapon and the Sunabunshin would turn to glass before shattering. The Jinchuriki was going to launch a wave of sand to push the demon back when the mace glowed and he disappeared again, reappearing just 10 feet away from Gaara. A sand wall rose up in front of the shinobi, but it barely slowed the attack and turned to glass before splintering into thousands of shards. However, the mace hit nothing but the desert floor. Suddenly the sand beneath the creature burst upwards and knocked the weapon away while launching him skyward and compacting into a ball that trapped it. The sphere instantly began steaming and cracks formed before the devil managed to break his muscular arm free, but Gaara smashed the ball into the ground and it broke through the desert floor like water. The Jinchuriki kept pushing the sphere deeper into the earth before placing his hands on the ground and compressing the sand. The beast was incredibly strong, but even he couldn't withstand the tons of pressure that flattened him. Gaara breathed a sigh of relief and turned to help the samurai, but they had defeated the smaller creatures with Kankuro's help and watched his battle with awe. The puppeteer hurried over to his brother after seeing him relax and said, "That was freaky." The redhead nodded, "Indeed, I have never seen anything like that before, but it's not important right now. We cannot let them get away with destroying those outlying villages. Let us hope the tracking team performed their duty." Kankuro pulled out a scroll and walked over to a nearby demon's body while unrolling it, but when he got closer the corpse dissolved into ashes. The others did the same. Damn, this just keeps getting weirder. The Chunin just shook his head and walked back to his younger brother. Did you see that? The puppeteer realized Gaara was staring into the distance and ignoring him. The team was supposed to send a runner after they started trailing the ships, yet I cannot sense one coming. Something is wrong. The Jinchuriki took off into the night as his brother sighed and quickly followed. The two traveled in silence until they were about half a mile away from the team's starting location and the Jinchuriki said, "I smell blood." Kankuro's face adopted a worried look. If there was something Gaara knew well, it was blood. "Let's go then." The brothers put on a burst of speed and came upon a grisly scene a few moments later. The 5 corpses of the tracking team and Jinan runner were spread out on the ground, vacantly staring at the sky with cloudy eyes. The Suna shinobi solemnly closed their comrades' eyelids before Gaara inspected the Jinan's corpse and let out a deep growl. Some of these wounds were inflicted after death. Those men beat the bodies for amusement. Kankuro placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "At least we saved the town and found out who was causing it. That ship was pretty big and there aren't many places it could escape detection. Besides, a different team might have been able to follow them. We'll definitely find these bastards and pay them back." The Jinchuriki's green eyes stared at the lifeless bodies. "I hope you're right." Naruto stood with Team 8 on a cliff overlooking a lush green valley where 14 ships rested on the earth around an ornate white building that looked somewhat like a castle. There were 4 thin spires in each of the cardinal directions that towered over 100 feet in the air with golden cones capping them, which added another 25 feet of height. Flying buttresses connected them to a central building that had a massive square base with 75-foot sides that supported a large tower, which rose 50 feet above the other spires and came to a point with a massive golden sun positioned on top. The 4 shinobi were spellbound by the awe-inspiring architecture as Kiba asked, "How did they build this thing without anyone knowing?" The blonde hummed as he thought about that as well. "Well, Ishigakure is the shinobi village in this country and probably knows, but they're very secretive and don't have contact with other villages. Regardless, we need to notify Konoha and Suna about this right away so they can decide how to proceed from here," replied Shino while breaking his vision away from the cathedral to scan the valley. "There is a sizable force gathered below us and their intentions don't seem friendly." Naruto nodded in agreement. "Right, I'll summon a toad to deliver the message." The Aburame sent him a withering glare and the blonde laughed nervously before continuing. Right after a move far away from Shino, of course, Kiba laughed as Akamaru woofed quietly, but they stopped to look at the southern entrance to the valley when 6 enormous ships floated in and Hinata gasped. "It looks like they're coming from Kaze no Kuni." Naruto watched the vessel slowly drift towards the castle before gently touching down as crews of men ran up and placed large beams of wood against the sides to hold them upright. "The women we fought mentioned something about raids. Those are probably coming back from one. I'll send some clones to follow the next group out, but right now I'm going to summon a toad and inform the Hokage." The blonde bit his thumb while Shino coughed into his fist. "After I go over there." Haida looked at 17 of his most trusted subordinates from the head of a rectangular oak table while thinking about the steps that led him to the brink of glory. When the former colonel retired from the military 7 years ago, he entered the priesthood and learned the holy arts at the academy for 2 grueling years. Haida graduated at the top of his class and was deployed to the frontier where he earned respect for his prowess as a fighter and healer. When the man returned to the capital 8 months later, they put him through advanced training for another year before ordaining him as a bishop, and shortly after that he was appointed head of the missionary board. Establishing missions here was his first assignment, and it could open the doors to even greater heights. The former knight had found a suitable location for the cathedral in some puissant country and slowly spread his tendrils throughout the area. He made sure to avoid the powerful nations, although they were mere flies compared to the weakest countries from his homeland, and gathered information for the colonization effort. Now was the time to put it to use. Haida grinned when his chief geographer entered the room with his arms full of rolled-up scrolls and books. The short man dropped his load on the table before running a pudgy hand through the thin blonde hair spread over his shining scalp and straightening the small round glasses over his hazel eyes. He coughed nervously while smoothing the wrinkles in a long blue robe that reached the floor, and grabbed the largest scroll before approaching the wall behind Haida. The chubby man had to jump several times to reach the string that pulled down a wooden board that nearly covered the entire wall, and once that was completed he unrolled the map. The geographer struggled to pin it up for several moments while the others in the room stifled their laughter, but eventually he succeeded and turned around before bowing nervously. "Apologies for my tardiness, Lord Haida. I gathered the information you requested quickly as I could." The priest put on a benign smile when the man finished. "It is no problem at all, my son. Now, could you please share your knowledge and enlighten us?" The chubby man tried to spread his sweaty blonde hair over his scalp once more before nodding eagerly. "Of course, my lord, I would be honored." He pulled out a short metal stick from his robes and flicked his wrist, causing it to extend into a pointer just over 2 feet long. The geographer smacked its tip into the map while saying, "This is our location near the border of Wind Country, but this land also shares borders with Rain Country, the Land of Earth, and Noodle Country." The man pointed at each place as he named it before drawing a large circle around the eastern part of Kaze no Kuni, all of Kawa no Kuni, and a small portion of southwestern Ame before arriving back at their current location. This is the area where the legends are concentrated. The northern and eastern fringes of Wind Country are mountainous with some small forests while the rest is desert. The Land of Rivers on the other hand is swampy and wooded, so supporting an army in this area will require significant effort. The geographer coughed nervously into his hand. "Yes, well, you see. That's mostly all I can be sure of. There is some information on local flora and fauna, but the missionaries have little to report about the governmental structures, except they are feudal and the rulers command a strong fighting force." The room burst into laughter when he finished, and the geographer pulled out a cloth to wipe the sweat forming on his brow before chuckling awkwardly, "By a savage's standard anyway. Still, I find it somewhat impressive that they have adapted a feudal system of government, since it is a natural precursor of the nation-state. Given enough time they may have civilized themselves, maybe a couple hundred years." The room laughed half-heartedly at the geographer's joke before he continued, "Right, well, the most mysterious part about this area are the shinobi. Almost every country has some and there is no shortage of information regarding them, but it seems like very little of it should be trusted. They are heroes to some and boogeymen to others, so it seems natural their stories would be exaggerated. For instance, one tale claims it took an army of 10,000 men 3 days and nights of constant battling to kill someone named Sundaime Raikage, and that seems believable to the stories about men called Shadaime Hokage and Madara Uchiha." Haido cut the man off when it became apparent he had nothing useful to say anymore. "Thank you for that knowledge, I am sure it will serve us well." The geographer bowed and hastily left the room as the priest turned his attention to the others gathered at the table. Kamaira waited several moments to see if her master would speak before standing. "Even though there is little information regarding these shinobi, I believe we should proceed with caution. The one that killed Fugai was younger than Temujin, and some of the raiders last night said a teenager nearly wiped out an entire raiding party and forced them to retreat by himself. What are the adults like if children wield such power?" Haido laughed when she finished, trying to show he wasn't worried. "That was one of 3 raids, my dear, and it was against the most fortified position we've attacked so far. These shinobi may be powerful, but they are also scarce. Why haven't we seen any until last night? Why is there so little reliable information about them?" The priest turned his gaze to the rest of his room and raised his voice. "Have you all forgotten the feats that great warriors in our history were said to have accomplished? They were nigh impossible, but we all know their legends were embellished over time. When there isn't much reliable information to go on, people assume and try to fill in the blanks. I bet this Sundaime fellow eluded less than 1,000 men for 3 days and nights before getting captured and executed." The confidence around the table slowly returned and Haido relaxed in his chair as a young blonde with long hair quietly stood up, waiting to be recognized. "Ah, Temujin, is there something you would like to add?" The blonde gave a short bow. "Yes, my lord, I had hoped to speak with you earlier but no opportunity presented itself. You see, my late arrival was due to these shinobi. I fought one to a draw. We were both knocked unconscious before his teammates found and captured me. He was a skilled fighter no doubt, but there was nothing truly special about him." Kamaira frowned as Temujin continued. He didn't see what that boy was truly capable of, and the brown-haired woman doubted she did either, but she remained silent to avoid Haido's ire. It was not a complete waste of time though. They were guarding a clan of nomads that told the Gelda legend in excruciating detail, possibly more accurate than our stories. A wide smile spread across the priest's face as Temujin sat down. "That is interesting. Could you find them again?" "Yes, my lord, with ease." "Excellent. Take 24 of our best men to visit these nomads and see if you can get the storyteller to return with you. I've always enjoyed a good tale." Haido watched the knight leave to carry out his orders and approached the map with a red pen before circling the area his geographer outlined. Then he put a large X in the northeastern part of Kaze no Kuni. "Soon we shall push forward and take this city to serve as our base in Wind Country. Once it is captured, the Emperor shall send more soldiers, laborers, and supplies by sea to support us and aid the search." Haido turned back to his officers. "When this corner has been secured, the search will begin while the main forces go invade Earth Country for the mineral deposits in the southern mountains before pushing west into the fertile plains. It may take several years to find the Galil stones, so we must seize more land to support ourselves if this location isn't arable. The priest pointed to the other scrolls on the oak table. Those contain more detailed maps and information about this area. Take them and make the necessary preparations for our attack. Plan well, for we are on the verge of utopia. With the power of the Galil stone we can unite the world under the Empire's banner and form a perfect society. Naruto sighed from his perch overlooking the valley where a foreign war party milled around a pristine white castle-like structure. It had been 2 days since they found the invaders and the shinobi had been observing them ever since. Whenever a ship would levitate and sail out of the valley, Naruto would create some cage bunshine to follow it, and he was disgusted by the memories they sent. The foreigners would pilot their ship through the mountainous regions past villages that had recently been destroyed to avoid detection until they got close to Kaze no Kuni, where they would spread out over the desert. The ships would demolish as many towns as they could during the night, slaughtering every man, woman, and child that tried to flee their burning homes. It frustrated the team to no end, especially because every time he sent information to the Hokage the reply was, "Keep watching, don't interfere." The blonde leaned back as his blue eyes stared at the stunning cathedral, wondering how humans could create some of the most beautiful things and then commit the foulest deeds. The Chunin lost track of time while he watched the small people parading around the massive church and ships, but eventually he was shaken out of his thoughts when Kiba grabbed his shoulder. "Earth to Naruto, you there, buddy?" Hinata said she saw something with her Byakugan. The Uzumaki looked over his shoulder to see teammates standing behind him, so he stood up and stretched while asking, "What's up?" The blue-haired Kunoichi appeared upset while answering, well, I saw Temujin entering the canyon with a platoon of soldiers, and, they had Kahiko as a prisoner." Naruto's blue eye shot open. "What? We've gotta help him." Shino pushed his sunglasses up his nose while responding, "That seems illogical. Our contract with the caravan expired and Hokage-sama's orders are to keep watching from a distance, not reveal our presence to the enemy." The blonde Jinchuriki growled while staring coldly at the Aburame, "There you go again with logic. Life isn't weighing the pros and cons of every action, Shino. We know Kahiko and it's the right thing to do, so we're going to rescue him even if it seems stupid. I'm Uzumaki fucking Naruto and I never leave a man behind." Hinata covered her blushing face with her hands as she stared longingly at the boy, remembering why she fell in love with him when they were younger. "I agree with Naruto-kun." The other three looked at the girl as she brought her blush under control. "We can't let them hurt him. Besides, if Kahiko gives them information it could hurt us in the long run, and if we rescue him we'll know what they wanted to learn." The Inuzuka nodded as Akamaru barked softly, "Yeah, there's no way you're leaving us out of this." Shino faced his comrades and shifted uncomfortably for a moment. "When you put it that way it seems logical to stay." Naruto grinned before looking back into the canyon. "I knew you'd see it our way. First we need to scout that castle thing for a discreet entrance. After that we'll sneak in and extract him quickly and quietly, hopefully they'll never even see us." The Konohanain crept through dingy maintenance tunnels while looking out vents to see elaborate marble sculptures carved from the wall and shining jewel-encrusted suits of armor lining the halls with beautiful oil paintings between them. They managed to push down their amazement at the amount of wealth contained in the building and continued towards the dungeon to rescue Kahiko. The four Chunin snuck past the camps while the ships left that night and scaled the building's walls before entering through a hatch on the roof that Hinata found with her Byakugan. They kept following the dark tunnel until it led to a vertical shaft big enough for two men to fit with ladders leading to passageways on the floors below them. The shinobi quickly hopped to the lowest level and peered through the slotted access door that led to a torture room, where a portly man wearing a bloodied white robe hummed loudly as he cleaned steel instruments. They watched as he lifted a scalpel up to the light while speaking into a glowing gem mounted in an ivory claw. "Right, that's a proper shine. Nothing like a sinister glint to frighten my playmates. Fear is such a lovely stench after all. Makes the whole job worth it." The man stopped and cackled loudly. "Who am I kidding? I love every minute of it." The light inside the jewel faded as he put the scalpel down. "Those wizards make something useful now and again, I guess. Adds a whole new dimension to the fun." Seeing there was no other way onto the floor, Naruto waited for the foreigner to start humming again before quietly swinging the door open. Hinata crept over the stone floors and tapped her index finger to the man's temple, killing him instantly. The Kunoichi caught the sadist as he collapsed and gently laid his body down while activating her Byakugan. She scouted the area as the others entered before performing an intricate series of intricate hand motions and pointing to 3 spots on her body. The boys nodded when the Hyuga finished and pulled out kunai as she gripped the door handle and pushed. 3 guards in the hallway turned as the wooden door swung open, but the men couldn't even defend themselves before the projectiles slid through vulnerable areas in their armor, ending their lives. Hinata led them down the long hallway before taking the third left into a dark corridor with one torch at the end. Shino grabbed it and the Chunin went to the farthest cell where they found Kahiko slumped against the back wall, wearing a burlap tunic soaked with blood while a black sack covered his head. His arms were held against the stone by two metal brackets that dug into his flesh, and were bolted in so high that he was suspended just above the ground. Naruto easily picked the lock and opened the creaky door, wincing at the sound that echoed down the corridor. When the caravan leader heard the noise, his head shot up and he frantically tried to push himself further against the wall while pleading in a muffled voice, "Please, I told you everything I know, so no more, no more. I'd rather die instead." The four looked at Kahiko while Naruto removed the sack, and when the torchlight illuminated his face they winced at the gruesome sight. Both of the man's eyes were swollen shut and it appeared his long beard was ripped out by hand, leaving a few patches of hair around the torn skin. Blood matted his long white hair that stuck to his body, and when he tried to get his hands loose the four shinobi saw his fingernails were ripped out while lacerations coated in salt went up and down his arm. The blonde walked forward while pulling out a kunai and slashed through the metal restraints with wind chakra. "Hush old man, it's me, Naruto. I'm here with my friends and we're gonna save you." Kahiko didn't seem relieved and started kicking his legs towards the Jinchuriki. "No, not this trick again. I already told you everything, I swear. Just let me die." The Uzumaki sighed while pulling up his hitai. "If that's what you want, just look into my eye." The man seemed grateful, almost happy, as he managed to open his eyes and stare at the swirling sharingan before slumping against the wall, breathing evenly while the Jinchuriki lowered his headband. Naruto and Kiba carefully picked up the sleeping man and started down the hallway when Hinata let out a gasp and said, There are another patrol that just entered the dungeon. They're coming down the main staircase and will discover the bodies in less than a minute." Naruto grit his teeth. "Damn it, take Kahiko and get him out of here, Hinata. Go back to the caravan and we'll catch up after making sure they can't go after you." The girl looked hurt while responding, "And no, I'm not a damsel in distress, Naruto-kun. I can fight too." The Jinchuriki growled angrily, but Kiba interjected before he said anything, "Actually, now that Akamaru's big enough we evacuate people." Shino and Naruto lifted the wounded caravan leader onto the canine's back before Kiba quickly tied his legs around Akamaru's body and his hands around the dog's thick neck so he wouldn't flail. "Let's go, hopefully we can slip out back before the bastards know we got Kahiko." They ran down the hallway as Naruto outlined his plan. "Kiba, go out the way we came in. I'll send some clones to follow and slow down pursuit. We'll stay behind and buy some extra time so you can get a head start to the caravan." The feral shinobi nodded as alarm shouts echoed down the hall and rushed ahead with Akamaru as the Jinchuriki summoned Cage Bunshine that followed. They rounded the corner first, but the remaining three shinobi were right behind and pivoted the other way as the five knights drew their weapons. Naruto flashed through a series of hand seals and raised his palms towards the men when they began to charge. Futon, Daitapa. The gusts of wind knocked the guards back while slicing into their steel armor and exposed pieces of skin as Hinata followed the attack, finishing the downed foreigners off with 5 gentle strikes. The kunoichi started rushing towards the staircase with the other two behind her while saying, "There's 4 levels underneath the main floors, this next one is still mostly clear, but guards are running down the stairs onto it now. We need to get to the other side of this floor to reach the next staircase as well." "How thick are the floors above us?" questioned Naruto when they stopped at the top of the stairs. I would say close to 20 feet in most areas, but on the first underground floor there's a spot you may be able to break through with the Rasengan. It leads to the central hub of the castle and is filled with people though. We might be better off taking the stairs all the way, but it seems like every soldier in the castle is running down them. What should we do?" Naruto walked down the hallway until he came to a 4-way intersection. "Easy, we wait." The Chunin could see the other two were confused. He continued, "If there are that many people running down the stairs now there's no way we'll be able to push through. Besides, we need to buy Kiba some time anyways. Once they get down here they'll ask us some questions and we'll stall for a while, which will give the people pouring down the stairs more time to get down here and spread out on the floors, and if every troop is down here there won't be any above us. And how will we break through the group of people that will undoubtedly have us cornered?" The blonde gave Shino a devious grin after he asked and formed a cross-shaped hand seal while saying, "Cage Bunshine no Jutsu." The hallway was packed with clones that lined the walls before performing the Totan Jutsu to become invisible. The 3 Chunin sat in silence while Naruto kept looking over at the Hyuga. However, she was avoiding his gaze with an angry look on her face. The one-eyed teen sighed and tried to grab the girl's hand, but she pulled it away. "Sorry if I insulted you, Hinata-chan. I know you're strong and would be able to get Kahiko out, That's why I asked. The kunoichi blushed and was about to respond, but dozens of foreign soldiers rushed down the hallway and surrounded them. More troops filed into the hallway over the next minute until the armored and robed men parted, allowing a brown-haired man wearing a teal cloak fastened by a massive diamond to walk through with Temujin right behind him. "So you're the one that killed Fugai? I was expecting somebody taller." The men surrounding Hido laughed before he continued, "Tell me, why have you visited my humble abode?" "It's anything but humble," snorted the blonde. The priest let out a good-natured chuckle. "Oh, I suppose you're right, but a man's home must reflect his greatness, and I assure you that my cathedral adequately does. Only if your definition of greatness is massacring innocent women and children as they fled the villages your men razed to the ground," angrily responded Naruto with sarcasm lacing his tone. Hido's adopted a regretful look. "I cannot deny the accusations, but we are on the verge of utopia and sometimes noble sacrifices are necessary for the cause." Red rings appeared in Naruto's blue eye. "There's nothing noble about getting slaughtered while running from people destroying your home." The Chunin faced Temujin. "I killed one of your friends, maybe a teacher, was that worth it?" The compassion in Hido's face disappeared when the blonde finished. "That's enough of this, where is the prisoner?" "I wasn't finished with our conversation and he was so close to seeing the error of his barbaric ways." Shino looked coolly stared at the man behind his sunglasses. "We were intercepted before completing the rescue and were forced to kill him to prevent you from gaining more information." The priest turned and walked down the hall with his cloak billowing behind him. "I see you won't cooperate, and I don't have time to play right now. I'm sure you three will be more compliant after we show you the same hospitality that babbling buffoon received." The soldiers grouped back up as the man walked away with Temujin, and once the foreigners lifted their weapons the clones became visible and jumped towards them while holding spinning balls of chakra. The tight quarters quickly became a wild melee as it filled with smoke, and the three shinobi took advantage of the distraction and jumped on the walls to escape. More soldiers ran into the hallway in front of the Chunin as they dropped back to the floor, but Naruto cleared the foreigners away with a Guku as Hinata called out, "There's another one around the corner preparing a fire attack." The blonde nodded and went through some hand seals as the other two turned away from the man, then he pivoted the opposite way with a compressed ball of water in his palm. "Suten, Ha and Ryu." The high-pressure stream easily passed through a fireball and extinguished the blast before hitting the wizard behind it. The foreigner smashed into a wall and his vision faded to black as a wind-coated kunai pierced his neck before disappearing into the marble wall behind him. Naruto turned to follow the other two and rounded the corner to see four unconscious bodies at the foot of the next staircase with Hinata and Shino waiting halfway up. The former prankster pulled a small yellow scroll from a vest pocket before unsealing three kunai with tags wrapped around the handles that were connected by steel wire. He coated the weapons with futon chakra and threw two into the walls and one into the ceiling while chuckling deviously. The shinobi had picked up some tricks after getting chased through the mines by Raiga and it was time to put them to use. The trio had barely got up the staircase when they heard the sharp crack of a flash tag, and the corridor glowed blue as screams of pain echoed up from the stairs, but the Chunin ignored them while sneaking through the hallways. What was that, Naruto-kun?" The blonde grinned cockily while answering, "Fu and Jutsu Hinata-chan." Those wires had chakra running through them in a circuit that fed the tags and kept them from detonating. Once the connection broke they activated. I gave the flash tags an instantaneous reaction and put a 3-second delay on the lightning tag for the best effect. Shino nodded, "Impressive. But we should focus on getting out of here before bragging about techniques." Naruto laughed embarrassedly while Hinata said, "Well, I'm trying to figure out how to get to the next staircase. As we go up the floors get more complicated and the stairways are always on opposite sides to confuse prisoners. More soldiers are coming down too." The blonde shinobi nodded when she finished, "All right. Just do your best and let us know when people get close." Hinata nodded and proceeded to lead them through a confusing series of twisted hallways for a few minutes before she said, They're coming straight ahead." "Turn so they'll be chasing us," said Naruto while pulling out a scroll with black edges. He took out several tags, and once Hinata confirmed their pursuers were behind them he created a clone and gave it one tag before lining the walls with the rest. Once he finished the clone used the Toten Jutsu to hide itself while the others continued running. It didn't take long for the pursuers to catch up and trigger the proximity sensors on the tags lining the walls, and several seconds later they shot out a slippery brown liquid that caused the men to fall all over each other and get coated in the viscous substance. The clone reappeared when they started to push themselves up and showed them a tag with the kanji for burn on it. "Did you know that toad oil is very flammable?" The Bunshine grinned as the tag slowly burned and let it float to the ground where the flames ignited the dangerous liquid. Intense fires consumed the area and scorched the decorations lining the hallway as the oil-soaked foreigners screamed out. Hinata ignored the noise and called out, "They are diverting people to deal with the fire and we are nearing the next staircase, but leading up to them is a long corridor that has multiple hallways branching off with men waiting to ambush us." The blonde nodded and created 3 clones before 2 hedged into copies of his teammates. They rushed ahead, and after entering the corridor 4 wizards appeared in a swirl of colors before sprinkling a white powder into the air while chanting. The dust flew out and engulfed the copies before it congealed into spiderwebs that trapped the clones as 12 knights poured out of the hallways. They ran towards the restrained Bunshine, but seals appeared on the ground when they got close before an explosion engulfed the warriors and clones. The wizards raised their arms to stop debris from entering their eyes, but the shockwaves made their sleeves flutter wildly and blocked their vision so they couldn't see Hinata burst through the smoke and kill the 2 in front with palm strikes to the heart. Naruto ran past her with his saber pulled back, but when he stabbed forwards the blade stopped after hitting the wizard's skin, like it was made from stone. The blonde saw a ring on the man's finger glow red as the air around them heated up and he substituted with a chunk of rock. A fireball roared down the hall, but Naruto flashed through a series of hand seals and called out, "Suten, Suijin-he." A wall of water blocked the attack, and when it fell a Haki Kushu hit the mage as Naruto rushed past him holding a Rasengan and hit the last wizard who was still catching his bearings. The deadly attack didn't pierce his skin, but the man was knocked to the floor, and the blonde held him down there with the orb of chakra. The foreigner tried to cast a spell before his stone skin enchantment wore off from the constant grinding, but Naruto grabbed one of his flailing arms and held it tightly until the Rasengan easily tore through his opponent's chest. During the melee Shino looked at the dissipating smoke and saw large cracks in the floor that revealed the ventilation system. Interesting. Bugs flew out of his sweatshirt and into the ruptured pipes that ran through the castle, and when the brief skirmish was over he walked through the cloud and said, "Let us continue." Naruto turned towards the stairs but Hinata said, "There's another ambush waiting at the top," before he could run up. He sighed after hearing that, "Of course there is, but I'm tired of being subtle." The other 2 sweat dropped after hearing that. What about a massive fire, explosions, and lightning traps was considered subtle? Naruto ignored them and formed a cross-shaped seal while flaring his chakra, Tajuukage Bunshine no Jutsu. Hinata and Shino understood how those things were subtle when the sheer amount of clones crushed them into the walls as smoke filled the hallway. The Bunshine let out a war cry and rushed up the staircase before the other 3 followed as the sound of steel clanging against steel and cries of pain echoed from the floor above them. When they arrived the trio saw knights and wizards in a pitched battle against the clone horde. Hinata scanned the floor with her Byakugan before smiling, "Follow me, we're going to break through." The Chunin jumped to the ceiling and ran over the battle before dropping back down. Hinata weaved them through the hallways to avoid any other melees before stopping in a large circular room and pointing upwards. "Here it is Naruto-kun, the ceiling is 1 foot of stone underwood." The blonde summoned a clone before forming a Rasengan that swirled rapidly above his palm. The Bunshine put both its hands over the orb and fed more chakra into the jutsu and his creator molded it until the sphere was nearly 15 inches wide. The Bunshine disappeared as Naruto overloaded his feet with chakra and exploded upwards, Odama Rasengan. He easily smashed through the ceiling and gracefully landed on the next floor in a defensive stance, but when the Jinchuriki looked around all the men were writhing on the ground with Kikaiku covering their bodies. The Aburame jumped through and lifted his arms as the bugs returned while saying, "I could not let you 2 do all the work." Naruto grinned at Shino as Hinata said, "They just finished clearing your clones out of the maintenance shaft and many are still running down the stairs. If we hurry it may be possible to slip through before too many people notice." The 2 boys nodded and followed her lead, but when they came to a wide open room made of white and pink marble with benches facing a decorated alcove 2 chanting wizards teleported into the chamber with 5 knights in front of them holding large shields for protection. The mages waved their arms and a complicated symbol appeared on the ground in front of them as a swirling black vortex formed over it. A 9-foot-tall humanoid creature emerged with orange skin and a dog-like face with 4-inch fangs protruding from his upper lips. Straight horns shot out 2 feet from the side of his head before coming to a deadly point, while a mohawk extended down his back until it came to a whip-like tail nearly 4 feet long with a sharp tip at the end that dripped poison. 2 wings that each seemed as big as the creature were unfolded in the open space as large black claws on his hand flexed angrily. A brown loincloth fastened by dark jewels covered his waist while smoky gray eyes stared maliciously at the teens as symbols on the floor beneath him rose up to cover his body before disappearing. Naruto suppressed his fear while lifting his Hitai-8, hoping this demon had the same weakness as Kyuubi. Sasuke's Sharingan began spinning rapidly before he looked the creature in its gray eyes while thinking, "Listen big guy, you can attack us or turn around and fight the people that summoned you away from your home." The pattern of the Sharingan flashed in the demon's eyes, but the symbols on his body glowed brightly as he struggled against the hypnosis. However, the complicated designs were fully visible as the creature waged an internal battle. After getting a good look at the seals, Naruto burst forward while molding chakra in his palm and hit the demon's stomach. Release. The teen smirked and jumped away as the foreigner's seal shattered and the hypnotized demon turned on the men behind him. He effortlessly backhanded the shield away from one knight before the other claw burst through his stomach. The creature flicked his wrist and the corpse flew off his arm before a flaming sword appeared in his bloody right hand and a chain whip in his left. The men looked nervously at the wicked creature that was grinning evilly before turning and sprinting away as the hypnotized beast gave pursuit. The Konohanain all sighed when the summoned demon chased after the foreigners and Hinata said, "Let's go." The Hyuga broke a stained glass window with a kunai and they jumped through it before dashing across the rocky ground. The trio ignored the yells around them as officers tried to rally their men, but the shinobi were too quick and dashed up the canyon wall towards Kawanokuni before they could even get the cannons in position. Kiba stood in a tree at the edge of camp, watching people scramble chaotically as they tried to gather their possessions and family members, but most of his focus was on the forest behind him. The dog user faced the trees when Akamaru barked loudly and grinned excitedly as three forms landed on the branch next to him without making a sound. "Good to see you guys made it out of there okay. We just got back an hour ago and Kahiko ordered everyone to pack up." Naruto shook his head while scanning the campsite. "They'll never get it done before those foreign bastards get here. You three tell everybody to leave things as they are and go hide. We'll let them know when it's safe to return." Kiba scratched the back of his head and gave the blonde a questioning look. "How close are they?" "An hour at the most, but they're probably closer." Team 8 nodded and blurred away to carry out the task while he went to scout the area. The clan had cleared a sizable amount of land for their campsite and there was nearly a quarter-mile stretch of open ground for grazing between the animals' pens and the forest. They had also thinned the woods around them over time for construction materials and firewood, so there wasn't much cover outside of the campsite. Naruto considered setting up an ambush deeper in the forest, but he was unsure which way the foreign soldiers would come and didn't want to risk them slipping by. The Jinchuriki looked up as most of the nomadic clan rushed towards the far end of camp, leaving their belongings scattered everywhere while animals stampeded wildly, and smiled deviously as a plan formed in his head. After getting a rough head count of the caravan members, he headed towards the medical tent, and when the blonde walked inside he found Kahiko laid out on a stretcher as medics finished wrapping linen bandages soaked in ointment around his numerous wounds. The clan leader managed to crack open his swollen eyes and gave Naruto an appreciative smile. "Thank you, my boy, I was pretty sure it was the end for me back there." The blonde gently patted the man's bandaged shoulder. "No problem, we weren't just going to leave you in there, but right now isn't the time for thanks. Everybody needs to get out of the camp, including you." The nurses gave Kahiko a sedative as two men picked him up and left the tent before the Chunin followed. He found Team 8 outside and waited for the camp to be evacuated before summoning a large amount of cage bunshine that transformed into different people wearing the nomadic clan's clothing. The clones began frantically packing the scattered items, and the shinobi walked towards the largest tent while their creator said, "Now we wait." Shino nodded approvingly as he opened the flap. "This appears to be a solid strategy, Naruto." Kiba playfully slapped the blue-eyed Chunin's back after they walked inside. "Yeah, I'm pretty surprised." The blonde growled jokingly while Hinata said, "Naruto-kun's pranks were very clever in the academy." The Jinchuriki beamed at her before she continued, He was just bad at schoolwork." "Hinata-chan," whined the teen as he slumped over. The three other Chunin laughed at him for several moments before descending into a comfortable silence, until the Hyuga spoke up nearly 20 minutes later. "There's 80 men half a mile away, 25 are flanking on each side while 30 are advancing straight up the middle." The four shinobi snuck outside and waited in the middle of camp until archers in the center group launched a wave of flaming arrows. The four Chunin managed to deflect most of them, but several hit tents and set fires. The disguised clones started screaming and rushed to the other side of camp as Naruto summoned more to put out the fire. When the fake civilians got past the animal pens, knights let out a ferocious war cry and rushed out of the woods while mages cast spells from trees lining the clearing. The bunshine jumped backwards to avoid the attacks while dropping their henges and performing the same series of hand seals simultaneously. When they finished, over 200 clones held two orbs of wind 18 inches wide in front of their palms, that each split into 50 arrows of swirling wind, futon, satadungan. Nearly 25,000 arrows sped towards the foreigners and skewered the charging knights before flying towards the mages attempting to cast protective spells, but they weren't faster than the wind and their stone skin enchantments couldn't outlast the seemingly endless barrage. Temujin cursed from across the clearing as nearly half of his men and all the wizards died in the shinobi's trap. "Is there no end to these savages' treachery? Fight us like men, not cowards. The knight couldn't deny the effectiveness of their tactics though and yelled out, "Retreat, fall back to the river." The archers loosed another barrage of arrows before taking off, but the shinobi didn't pursue. The soldiers ran over a mile with no problems, but slowly began to collapse from exhaustion before getting much further. Temujin's brow furrowed in confusion as he looked around and wondered what was happening to them, but then he felt the adrenaline rush that came after tapping into the power of the Galil stone. He peeled back the outer layer of his armor to see hundreds of tiny black dots crawling over his blue spandex and frantically wiped them off while jumping into a nearby stream. The insects flew away before he landed in the cold water, but before relief set in the foreigner heard a familiar voice call out, "Mizu no Tatsumaki." The liquid around him started spinning rapidly and shot upwards, causing the red-eyed blonde to let out a panicked yell before crashing into the riverbank. The knight could see two figures walking towards him through his blurred vision, but he couldn't force his body to move before one of their fists smashed into his face and everything went black. Temujin suddenly regained consciousness when a bucket full of freezing water splashed over his face. The teenager desperately gasped for air and lifted his head while looking around to see where he was. A single candle illuminated the small corner of a tent and allowed the foreigner to see the wooden chair he was secured to. Steel wire uncomfortably bound his hands behind the chair's back while the earth itself twisted up his legs and trapped them. The boy tried to break the wire around his wrist when a bright light flashed on across the tent and forced his eyes closed. The knight squinted and tried to see through the intense glare when a wooden club smashed into his cheek and he heard, "That was your payback, now let us handle it from here." The light dimmed and the restrained blonde opened his eyes to see a heavily bandaged Kahiko holding a club as Naruto unsheathed his saber and leaned closer to ask, "What is it you guys want here? And don't give me that crap about culturing savages." The dazed teen was intent on not saying anything when the Chunin's weapon glowed red and nicked his cheek. The Galil stone implanted in Temujin sent out energy to fight the corrosive chakra eating away at his flesh, but the pain was still excruciating. Naruto kept the blade there for 3 seconds before stepping back, but to the foreigner it felt like hours. "Sorry, I was supposed to demonstrate what would happen if you didn't answer the question first, my mistake. Now tell me, what is your master's objective?" Fear shone in his red eyes as they stared at the demonic weapon. Those 3 seconds were worse than anything he'd gone through since watching his parents get butchered as a child. The physical agony was like nothing he'd ever experienced, but it also felt like the foul energy was trying to devour his soul. To find the source of the Galil stones so we can harness their power and create a utopia. With that kind of might it would be possible to unite the world under the Empire's banner. The knight frantically tried to move backwards as the blade got closer to his face. "Bullshit, how does killing innocents help create a utopia? How does torturing an old man help accomplish your dream? Sometimes noble sacrifices are necessary." "Shut the fuck up," roared Naruto as he stabbed the blade down. Temujin closed his eyes in fear and nearly wet himself before hearing it pierce the wood between his legs. "You can't slaughter helpless people and call it a sacrifice." The knight looked at him pleadingly, "You don't understand, the Empire can bring peace and prosperity to this land." Naruto's blue eyes stared at him coldly, "That's something you can't force. Peace needs to be accepted for it to mean anything. You can't create a utopia by killing people that disagree with your ideas until everyone left thinks like you. The path to your dream cannot be paved with the bodies of innocents. To create a peaceful world you need to help different people understand one another, but that's impossible if you kill their loved ones. That only leads to hatred and more violence, and the cycle will feed itself over and over again, never stopping. As long as it exists, true peace, a utopia, can never be real." Temujin's head dropped as he weakly said, maybe you're right." Then the boy let out a sob. "Who would have thought savages would be wiser than our civilized empire? It's not nice to call your kinsmen savages." The teenagers all looked at Kahiko in surprise and he smiled. "I've known for a while now, that symbol on your chest only appeared after someone from the royal family had a Galil stone implanted." Temujin peeled down his spandex to see the mark where his stone was located. "Is that why my sign was different than the others, and why I can't transform?" The caravan leader nodded. "Yes, when someone not of the royal bloodline received a stone they would get a random mark and could only use a bastardized form of its true power. You, my boy, have more power and greater control over your Galil stone without having to transform." Temujin was shocked into silence as the man continued, "That's also why Naragui is so fond of you. He is the only thing left we have from our homeland and was the royal family's beloved pet. He's actually much older than me." Temujin stared at the ferret as it walked into the tent before looking up at the shinobi. "I don't know where the attack will happen, but the invasion of Wind Country starts tomorrow. The raids that Hido sent out finished destroying any towns, cities, or outposts that could attack once the ships passed. and they will sail out tonight. He plans to sneak through the mountains in the northeast to avoid the defensive lines set up because of the raids. Kahiko frowned. That mountain range contains the Gallo mine. 5 heads whipped around when he finished speaking and the caravan leader sheepishly grinned. My family were the mine's keepers and kept the location secret through the generations, but I only know it is in the mountains of Kaze no Kuni. Still, I'm sure we can find it, Temujin. It will just take some time. I know where the mine is. Eh, did you hear that? Naruto looked around frantically but didn't see anyone else in the tent. Down here. They looked at the floor to see Naragui smiling up at them weirdly and Naruto's jaw dropped while he shouted, "D the cat talked. I'm actually a ferret, thank you very much, and I'm not talking, I'm projecting my thoughts into your heads." As Kahiko said, I was the royal family's pet and still remember where the mine is. Kiba freed Temujin as Shino brought his supplies over. The foreigner stood and began strapping the armor on as Kahiko bowed. "Thank you for everything, I will stay and make sure things run smoothly here. Please, go and destroy the Gallo stones before their power is unlocked once more. Come, we can't afford to waste any more time." The caravan leader sighed as the 5 children rushed out of the tent with Naragui, praying they would be able to complete the task his ancestors could not. Naragui effortlessly leapt up the sheer cliff face while the 4 shinobi did the same, but Temujin wasn't used to traveling at these speeds and was forced to ride Akamaru. They had been traversing the numerous mountains in northeastern Kaze no Kuni for the past few hours in silence, until the ancient ferret projected his thoughts out. "The mine is located inside the next mountain, you'll be able to see it once we reach the summit. The main entrance was destroyed after the clan sealed it off, so we'll have to use a chute halfway up the mountain." Naruto sped past everyone and leapt onto the peak when Naragui finished. The blonde stood there and stared into the distance until the ferret climbed up next to him. "Do you mean that mountain?" The blonde pointed towards the mountainside that one of Hido's warships bombarded with cannon fire, creating an avalanche that killed several Suna shinobi and forced dozens more to give up the ground. All 20 battleships were floating in the 6-mile stretch between the 2 peaks and launching a continuous barrage towards the Sunanin, defending it, because it's going to be pretty hard getting in there. Hinata activated her Byakugan and scanned the battlefield. There aren't that many shinobi down there right now, they may be a scouting party. If we wait, then it's possible they'll pull back and we can get in after the ships pass. When the Kunoichi finished, a cloud of sand shaped itself into Shukaku's head before letting out a roar that launched a sandstorm towards the invaders, and Naruto looked at the Hyuga. "If Gar is here, I don't think they'll be moving far anytime soon. He can stall them for a while." The blonde Chunin started sliding down the mountainside while yelling, "Let's meet up with him and figure out what's going on. If we can defeat them here, destroying the Gallo stone will be easier." Shino and Kiba followed the Uzumaki, but Hinata stopped Akamaru as he was about to jump down and uncap her canteen before pouring some water into the dirt. She scooped up a handful of mud and drew the symbol of Sunagakure onto the front and back of Temujin's armor while saying, "So you don't get hit by friendly fire." When the Hyuga was done, she slid down as well and Temujin wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, holding on for dear life as the animal sped down the jagged slope to catch up with the others. Gaara growled when his Mugen Saijin Daitappa, Infinite Sand Cloud Great Breakthrough, dissipated and less than 30 enemy bodies were on the ground. The wizards were able to shield the frontline soldiers from the brunt of his techniques and transport the wounded back to priests, where they would be healed at a rate comparable to medic nin. The Kazekage's son didn't have many shinobi with him, but he still needed to stall until the Sunanin spread throughout the area could muster and come assist him. The earlier raids forced his father to spread their men throughout the desert, so it could take another hour or two. Thankfully they knew the foreign army's location and were able to keep the area relatively small. Gaara didn't want to think what would have happened if they were forced to stretch across the entire northern desert. A giant wall of sand nearly 100 feet long formed to intercept another salvo of cannon shots, but many still broke through and exploded. However, they lost enough inertia that the shrapnel didn't wound any Sannin. The Jinchuriki created a horde of Sunabunshine that rushed towards the foreign army while trying to create more sand to use, but the rock was incredibly solid and grinding it down was a slow process. He watched the trained knights easily slaughter his mindless dolls, but that was part of the plan. Gaara lifted his palm up as large spikes of sand shot up around the warriors and easily pierced their armor, but the wounded were instantly transported away as more living bodies came forward, forcing the redhead to fall back and cede ground. The teen fought down his frustration and focused on the incoming army. He couldn't let them pass. Once the ships got through the mountains, they would be able to easily maneuver around him and attack one of the largest trading cities in Kaze no Kuni just 2 miles past the mountainous area. The Jinchuriki was about to form another Ryusabukaryu to push them back when his right flank began to collapse. Gaara thought the enemies were about to break through and prepared a counter, but stopped when he heard a familiar bark and saw two Grey Twisters rip through the knights closing in. It was surprising to see Team 8 here, but the Shukaku's container was absolutely shocked after he noticed a blonde jump above the crowd while saying, "Futon, Kami Orishi." He watched as a twister nearly 10 feet wide shoot out of Naruto's hands before plowing through several rows of soldiers, and when they dodged the wind user followed their movements with his arms and the jutsu did the same, taking out several more before dissipating. The Konoha shinobi fought through the foreign warriors and made steady progress until they got to the redhead, and the blonde Jinchuriki walked up to his brother with a wide grin. "Gaara, it's good to see you." The redhead nodded back, "You as well my friend, but what are you doing here?" Naruto rubbed the back of his head. "Well, it's kind of a long story but it has to do with these guys." He pointed to the mountain on their left that was swarming with knights and wizards. "We need to get in there." Gaara didn't answer right away as hundreds of sand shurikens formed and launched towards advancing enemies. They stopped and hovered in midair when the front row interlocked their shields to block the attack while those behind them lifted the shields above their heads, but the other Suna shinobi threw kunai over the formation. A series of explosions scattered the troops and the sand shuriken ended their lives before Suna's Jinchuriki answered, "Then we'll need to push them back. But we don't have the manpower to accomplish that now. Your help would be appreciated until our main forces arrive though." Naruto shook his head and bit his thumb. "Nope, we can't afford to wait. If they find out what's in there it's over." Gaara looked confused, but before he could ask anything his first friend cut him off. "I've been waiting to do this for so long." An orange shroud surrounded him before long ears and one tail formed, then the blonde slammed his palm on the ground. "Kushios no Jutsu, Gamma Trinity." Temujin was startled when they rocketed into the air, and was absolutely petrified after he realized there was a large orange and red toad underneath them when it grumpily roared, "Why have you summoned me Naruto?" The blonde just grinned, "Aw come on, don't be like that Bunta. Gamakachi always says you complain about not getting summoned anymore." Gamabunta muttered something about drinking with loudmouth sons when he realized that he wasn't the only toad around, and grinned after hearing Gamaken, "It is good that you have called on me, but I may not be that helpful. I'm not very graceful you see." Gamahiro smiled at Naruto while unsheathing his swords and jovially said, "Humph, this better be good if you summon the Trinity Brat. We need to push that army back quickly." As the blonde finished the ships let out a cannon barrage, but Gamahiro launched a massive wind blast from his mouth that easily diverted them, "And we don't have much manpower, but with you guys." The blonde trailed off after watching Hido's cathedral float around a mountain in the distance with a massive piece of earth underneath it as Kiba gasped, "I guess they didn't build that thing here after all." Lightning crackled between the four towers and centered on the golden sun in the middle before a massive bolt shot towards the Suna contingent in summons. Gamabunta launched a Teppadoma, but the lightning blast easily pierced the jutsu and rained water onto the battlefield, although the attack was noticeably smaller afterwards. All three toads inhaled deeply when the Teppadoma failed and Gamahiro unleashed a stream of wind, Gamabunta a shot of oil, and Gamaken released a blast of flames. The three attacks combined into a firestorm that smashed the lightning bolt before bursting into a massive fire that drowned the battlefield in light and smoke. Once the explosion of chakra died down, Hinata reactivated her Byakugan and said, They're doing something big in front of the castle. There's at least 100 people moving in sync and they're putting out a lot of chakra." Temujin's jaw dropped as a massive portal formed and he shook his head, "No, not him. They wouldn't." The four shinobi gave each other confused looks before Kiba asked, "Who?" "Fire Namar," was the knight's one-word response as a long, red-scaled nose emerged before a stream of flames exploded out of the nostrils. Hido grit his teeth when the toads countered his cathedral's attack before adjusting his high-powered telescope to see the figures standing on top of the orange summon, "Those brats again, and Temujin is with them." The priest cursed while sitting back in his elegant chair to observe the reactions of his commanders, and was disappointed to see they were demoralized, although he understood why. Most of the savages they came across were able to utilize magic effectively, and some were even capable of summoning, but the barbarian armies would always crumble under the Empire's combination of superior technology and warriors. They had never seen anything like this before though. A mere child summoned 3 giant toads when it would take a score of highly accomplished mages to equal that feat. Witnessing that was enough to make the hardiest soldier doubt himself. Perhaps those old legends about shinobi were true. The strength of these teenagers made his commanders indecisive, and now they were overthinking the situation instead of acting. The elite soldiers, leaders of the world's most powerful army, were afraid of 2 children, and doubted their capabilities because of it. If this continued, the battle would be lost. Hido knew he needed to do something drastic to restore the troops' faith, an action that would make them feel invincible. The priest grabbed a sapphire the size of a lime from the table next to him and waited for it to shine before saying, "All mages report to the summoning circle and call Fire Namar to the battlefield." The light inside the gem faded while Hiro adjusted his telescope to watch the ritual. Scores of wizards teleported outside as a summoning rune shone on the earth beneath them. The spellcasters pulled out their magical instruments before performing complicated hand motions in perfect synchronization, and the air around them crackled with power. A black vortex swirled above the cathedral and grew to massive proportions as a red snout slowly emerged and breathed out streams of fire. A massive reptilian head grew out of the portal with two horns sticking 8 feet out the back of his skull, while intimidating yellow eyes with slit pupils hungrily stared at the people on the battlefield for a moment before he continued emerging. Red spikes lined Fire Namar's 25-foot-long neck and continued down his spine as the massive wings on his back unfolded. The creature flew out of the vortex before landing on the ground, completely destroying the area and causing the earth to shake while his 30-foot-long tail eagerly struck the shattered stones. The dragon measured 90 feet from nose to tail with a wingspan of 120 feet, and was covered by lustrous red scales that seemed to shine in the daylight, except for his underside, which was tan and looked like armor plating. The sheer splendor of the beast captivated everyone on the field until it let out a terrible roar that stopped the hearts of the invaders and Shinobi alike. Hiro grinned when the control runes glowed on the creature's scales before disappearing, which meant the ritual was a success. The savages had no hope now that Fire Namar entered the battle. The dragon's strength was unmatched and he would make a meal out of those toads. The priest adjusted his telescope to look at the figures standing on top of the orange amphibian while confidently asking, "What will you do now, boy? Do you truly see the futility of your efforts?" The man breathed an internal sigh of relief when the officers seemed to relax, and the tension in the control room disappeared as they began delivering orders once more. Gaara managed to shake himself out of the trance gripping the fighters when the dragon landed on the ground and called out, "Retreat," before facing the armored blonde. "What is that thing?" Temujin shook uncontrollably when Fire Namar roared and took several deep breaths before he was able to speak. "My country's ultimate weapon. Almost 200 years ago the Emperor ordered a formidable group of wizards to capture the most powerful dragon in his domain. He then used it to rapidly expand his borders, but the strategy was so effective his rivals copied the idea. The nations raced to capture dragons for their own use, and the devastation caused by the resulting battles was so great the countries signed a treaty that banned them on the continent. The Suna Shinobi managed to gather their wits and retreat calmly while the foreigners scattered left and right to create space for the massive creatures to battle. Naruto watched the Sand Nin fall back before focusing on the dragon. Can you handle this, Bunda?" The boss toad lit his pipe before inhaling deeply and breathing out the pungent smoke. "We're about to find out, kid." Game Abunta stared at the daunting creature and took another drag from his pipe. "Damn, Jiraiya never made us do anything this hard." The summon exhaled a thick cloud of smoke that blocked the invaders' vision before throwing his pipe into the middle of them simply because he could and crushed dozens as Gaara's sand carried the humans to a safe area. The boss toad nodded to his brothers and they hopped towards the beast while unsheathing their respective weapons. Gamma Hero jumped over the other toads and slashed his katana onto the dragon's neck, but it sparked while harmlessly sliding over the ridged scales. Fire Namar turned and prepared to launch a cone of fire towards the green toad, but Gamaken's shield smashed into the side of his head and sent the blast straight into the air. The dragon reared up and prepared to slash the magenta summons with his claw when several tepidoma hit the monster's face, blocking his vision momentarily. Ken and Hiro retreated after Buna's jutsu landed and the dragon took to the skies. The toads launched another combo of wind, fire, and oil towards Fire Namar, but he easily countered with his own firestorm. The toads were surprised when it was able to match their collaboration attack and leapt away when the beast roared, causing his flames to grow larger and overtake the jutsu before turning a patch of earth into molten rock. They kept hopping around the dangerous fire blasts until Gamaken jumped onto a mountain as the dragon flew low for another pass before leaping over the colossal reptile and using his Sasumata to pin its neck to the ground. He stood on Fire Namar's back and tried to hold the beast down, but he easily regained his feet so the magenta toad hopped away as Gamma Hero descended from above and stabbed the monster with a wind-coated katana, yet his blade barely pierced the creature's armor before he was smacked away by its tail. The toad pushed himself up while holding his right side and hissed in pain before saying, "Damn, I don't think I can take too many of those." "I'm surprised you took one," Game Abunda grunted. "This thing's is bad news, all our attacks don't even phase it. I wish I could do more, but I'm not very graceful." The boss toad sighed as Fire Namar looked at them arrogantly and spoke in a booming voice that momentarily sapped their will to fight. "Come now, froggies, I like to play with my food before eating it. The dragon smiled viciously after finishing and Gamabunta pushed aside the feeling hopelessness aside while observing the ruined battlefield. "I have a plan." Haido cursed when the giant toads exhaled smoke that blocked his vision, but when it cleared he watched the monsters battle until one of his subordinates reported, "Sir, Peak 7 has come under assault." The man adjusted his telescope to view the mountain and saw Temujin running up the slope with the 4 shinobi. "Why are you attacking that position when your allies are retreating? There must be something important in there." Haido touched the large diamond fastening his cloak while thinking, "Ranka, Kamaira, report to me immediately." The brunette walked into the command room moments later with a woman wearing dark purple armor that had swirling gold inlays and a red cape fastened to the back with golden studs the size of her fist. She had blonde hair that fanned out as it went down her neck and stopped above her shoulders, while 2 long bangs framed the knight's face that reached her ample breasts. 2 dangerous spikes extended 6 inches off the Renka's square shoulder pads while smaller 2-inch spikes jutted out of the kneecaps in her boots. The blonde flexed her armored hand eagerly as multicolored eyes with a lilac ring around the pupil and a darker purple one outside that flashed with excitement as the 2 women simultaneously bowed and intoned, "As you command, Lord Haido." The priest turned to a man wearing white armor that had small rubies inlaid to form a shining sun. "Colonel, I want you to take command while I'm gone. If we're not back before Fire Namar's victory move towards the city, we can't afford any more delays. When you arrive, give them one chance to surrender. If they don't, take control of the dragon and burn everything down except the walls." The knight stood up and bowed, "Thank you, sir, but I'm not the ranking officer here. I know who it is, Colonel, but you were the only effective leader when the battle started to turn against us. Your superiors were paralyzed by doubt and fear, so I trust you with this command. Prove you are worthy of it. If anybody tries to usurp your authority, they are breaching my orders, and the punishment for that is death." Haido stood and walked up to the knight. "In the highly unlikely situation that I have not returned by then, have the mages contact General Barca and tell him to proceed. He shall bring a 10-ship fleet from the ocean in the south. Garrison the city and march out to meet him halfway when the savages turn to meet his attack." The knight saluted as Haido turned and walked out with the 2 women flanking him. "Now, it's time to pay those brats back." One of the rings on Kamaira's fingers glowed brightly before they disappeared in a swirl of fire. As the sand platform floated down, Naruto pointed over to a mountain swarming with foreign troops. "We have to get over there now. This fight will keep everyone pinned down and the soldiers up there won't get reinforcements." Gaara didn't answer until everyone was safely on the ground. "Of course, but I cannot leave my post. We must stall them here until my father arrives, even if it means releasing the Shukaku." The blonde Jinchuriki gingerly rubbed his stomach as the redhead continued, "If those ships get into the open desert, I won't be able to contain them all." The Uzumaki reached out and clasped his friend's hand. "I understand, it was good seeing you, Gaara." The redhead shined over to the Sunanin building impromptu fortifications as Naruto faced his teammates. "Let's get moving, stay behind me for now." The 5 teenagers dashed towards the mountain as the masked Chunin unsheathed his saber, and when they got closer to the first defensive line of foreigners, he ran ahead while a thick layer of Kyuubi's chakra coated the blade, filling the air with a potent killing intent that temporarily paralyzed the invaders. The Chunin picked out the strongest looking one as the knight tried to react, but he couldn't even lift his shield before the saber sliced through his armor and left a shallow cut going up his left side. Pain overrode the man's fear and he tried to punch the blonde with his spiked gauntlets, but Naruto was faster and dropped to his hands before kicking the knight back into the crowd behind him while a thin strand of red chakra coated by a translucent blue shell extended from the blade and connected to the man's wound. His comrades tried to sever it, but they were forced to drop their weapons as the vile chakra engulfed them as well. Priests rushed forward and began chanting around the man as he writhed in pain, but their efforts were useless and he was quickly covered by the toxic energy. His skin started to peel off and blood mixed with the Kyuubi's chakra before it formed a black sphere around the knight. The closest men to the spectacle collapsed and began throwing up, but Naruto wasn't fazed as he watched the orb disappear, revealing a humanoid form covered in dense black chakra with red streaks running through it. The pseudo-Jinchuriki had long thin ears sticking out of the top of its head, pure white eyes, and foul vapors leaking out of its mouth, which was lined by small chakra fangs. The creature dropped to all fours as the first chakra tail sprouted from the base of its spine, quickly followed by the second, but when the third finished growing, Naruto stopped the transformation. The pseudo-Jinchuriki roared ferociously and broke the foreigners out of their stupor. However, the primal energy it was releasing sent them into a frenzy. Knights and wizards charged towards the beast with no concern for their safety, and its tail shot out, easily piercing dozens of men until the appendages looked like macabre garlands. After he finished slaughtering the initial wave of foreigners, the possessed knight whipped their corpses into the crowd before charging forward. Some officers gathered themselves and called for a retreat to form up on higher ground, but one wizard didn't budge, confident his stone skin enchantment would buy enough time to cast a spell. He ignored the chakra claw coming towards his left side in a wide loop and threw a handful of feathers into the air, but as he began chanting and waving his arms, the claw bifurcated him. The mage could only stare at his legs in disbelief for a moment before a chakra tail impaled him through the chest. The transformed knight looked up to see his former comrades had regrouped on top of a plateau 40 feet away and were waiting for wizards to cast a spell. A dozen of them were chanting while throwing gray powder into the air, so the beast gathered its vile black chakra in front of its mouth and condensed it into an orb the size of a cantaloupe. The spellcasters finished first and the powder congealed before shaping into hundreds of glowing silver knives that flew towards the beast, while another half-dozen mages raised a barrier in front of the formation. The miniature Kyuubi ignored the blades and let them bounce of its chakra cloak harmlessly before launching the black orb towards the mass of troops. The mages smirked confidently as it flew towards their barrier, knowing it would pass through another dimension before getting redirected at the creature, but the attack suddenly dipped. It hit the cliff wall underneath the plateau and caused it to collapse, trapping some foreigners underneath large boulders. Most wizards teleported when the attack changed course, and the knights that could move after the plateau crumbled ran further up the mountain, leaving their helpless comrades as a sacrifice to buy more time. The warriors pinned by the rocks struggled to escape as the beast eagerly stalked towards them with a malicious glint in its white eyes. Naruto watched the transformation intently and cut it off at three tails before turning to his teammates, but the Jinchuriki let out a curse when he saw them. Temujin was quivering on the ground in a puddle of his own vomit, and the members of Team 8 weren't faring much better. They were on their hands and knees breathing heavily, and when the transformed knight roared, the Chunin curled up into the fetal position while Akamaru whined next to Kiba and tried to stick his head into the brunette's vest. "Damn it! Snap out of it, guys, we need to move now." Naruto slapped Kiba and Shino gently, but they didn't respond, and neither did the Hyuga when he leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Hinata, can we go on a date when this is over? Let me help." The blonde's head snapped up and he watched Naragui walk up to Temujin while the diamond in the middle of his forehead glowed green. The animal placed his paw on the right side of the knight's chest and a wide aura outlined the two before expanding to surround the five of them in a bubble. This should mitigate the effects. The ancient ferret looked at the blonde strangely while the others started to stir, to think a mere child could contain the Kyuubi no Kitsune. The shaken teens started to breathe normally as the Konoha shinobi looked in awe at the overwhelming force wielded by the pseudo Jinchuriki. It seems illogical that something so powerful can be contained within a person. I cannot fathom it. Shino trailed off as Hinata fought back tears. That's what Naruto-kun is protecting us from. Thank you. Akamaru put his paws onto the blonde's shoulders and licked him as Kiba let out an impressed whistle. I can't imagine what that thing must look like if this is only a third of its power. I appreciate the support, guys, but we don't have the time now, replied the blonde Chunin while looking up the mountain. How much further until the shoot? Naragui started hopping up the craggy slope. It's just over halfway up. Let's get moving, keep a lookout for enemies. Hold on a second. Naruto unsealed a spare shirt and tossed it to Temujin as he stood up. Let him clean up first. The knight quickly wiped himself off and followed the ferret as he led them up the mountainside. They made good progress, but as they were nearing the chute, Hinata called out, "They're above us and dropping boulders, scatter." The shinobi jumped to the sides, but Temujin drew his sword and it extended to full length while he ran up the sheer wall, straight towards the tumbling rocks. He hopped to the right to avoid one and kept running up before he slid to the left to avoid another stone, but when the foreign teenager looked, he saw a massive boulder falling right at him. The knight tried to keep sliding left, but his boot got caught in a rock jutting out and he couldn't move. The armored blonde closed his eyes and waited for the stone to smash into him. Rasengan. His red eyes snapped open and saw Naruto thrust the spiraling sphere forward before it shattered the boulder. The Chunin disappeared in a puff of smoke after hitting the mountainside, and Temujin sliced through the stone, trapping his foot. He continued charging up the sheer wall and jumped over onto the ledge, where two knights in full green armor were waiting with their swords drawn and shields at the ready, while a young brunette-haired wizard wearing plain blue robes that matched his eyes stood behind them. Temujin charged forward and stabbed towards the right one's legs, but it was easily blocked by the boy's shield. However, the older knight had planned for that. He was already swinging his left hand forward while the shield unfolded, and its electrified metal edge easily sliced through the weak spot in his armor and sliced sword arm off. The wounded knight looked blankly at his severed limb through the slot as Temujin kicked him off the cliff before using his small shield to block a horizontal slash aimed towards his neck. The armored blonde rolled forward and took out his new opponent's feet, which made the boy drop the crossbow he was trying to draw. Temujin grabbed the ranged weapon as he stood up and fired the bolt into the downed knight's face before tossing it towards the wizard. The mage didn't flinch and completed his spell as the wooden crossbow shattered harmlessly against his skin. A large gust of wind burst forward from his body, but Temujin stabbed his blade into the rock and waited for it to end before kicking loose stones towards his opponent. They did no damage, but every hit sapped the stone skin enchantment, no matter how insignificant. The spellcaster glared at him and pulled a thin wooden wand from his loose sleeve before shooting a small fireball at the knight. The blonde jumped over the attack and kicked more pebbles at his opponent when he landed before bursting into motion to avoid another fireball. The silver knight continued avoiding the magical flames and kicking rocks towards the spellcaster until he flinched, which meant the stone skin disappeared. The wizard glared angrily as he raised his wand before fire burst out of the tip and flew towards Temujin. A green aura outlined the knight's body as he charged forward and jumped into the fireball. The mage cried out in surprise when his opponent burst through the flames with his glowing sword pulled back and futilely raised his arms in defense before the deadly blade stabbed through his chest. The blonde teen had no expression as he stared at the two lifeless bodies and suppressed the bile climbing in his throat. If the attack was yesterday, he might have been fighting side by side with them. He stayed like that for a few moments until the others came over the cliff and Kiba let out a low whistle. Impressive, 3 guys in less than a minute. The knight fought down his anger at the shinobi's dismissive tone and coldly said, "Not really, this was a rookie unit. They were only supposed to build defenses and support older soldiers, but they still fought valiantly. I've never met them, but I know several people from this unit well, and they always bragged about their rookies. And what about the other people that you've killed fighting? Don't they deserve the same consideration?" Temujin looked back to see Naruto's blue eye carefully observing him. It doesn't matter if you know the person or not, they're still someone's brother, father, mother, sister, aunt, friend, or lover. All the people connected to their lives will feel pain whether you personally know them or don't, and that's why Hido's methods cannot create a utopia. You can't unite people by spreading suffering, that only leads to hatred and more violence. The knight's head dropped in shame and Naragui cut in. "We are close to the entrance, you can think about the question later." The ferret started up the cliff and the teenagers followed him until he came to a stop near a river of boulders that stretched down the mountainside several minutes later. "Shoot, the entrance is here but a landslide sealed it off. Can anybody open it?" He nodded. His eyes widened as she turned her head. "We'd better do it fast. More troops are coming now." Temujin unsheathed his weapon while carefully observing the boulders. "Hold them off, I'll get it open." The shinobi headed towards the approaching troops as Galil energy engulfed the knight's sword until his blade looked like it was coated in green fire. He pulled the weapon back and launched 2 crescents towards the boulders. One sliced through a rock 20 feet down the slope and another cleaved one in half 140 feet up the mountain. After the rocks split in two, the boulders they supported began to tumble down the incline and the knight launched several more crescents that created another rock slide. "There, do you see it?" Temujin's head instinctively shifted until he saw a wide chute and launched more green crescents so the massive stones didn't rest on it. When the landslide finished, there were no boulders near the opening and Naragui hopped on his shoulder. "Excellent work, call the others." The knight was about to turn towards the shinobi when he saw 3 figures sliding down the mountain and realized it was Hido, Kamaira, and Renka. He slashed his sword and a long green whip flew towards the trio, but they gracefully flipped over it and dropped into the chute while Hido laughed mockingly. Temujin cursed and turned around to see the 4 ninja running up the slope, and he yelled out, "Hurry up, Hido must have been following us because he just jumped in with 2 of his lieutenants." He raced towards the shaft but had to jump backwards when a massive fireball exploded in above the opening and the teenagers looked around to see 5 wizards had teleported on higher ground with 4 knights each. Naruto scanned the battlefield and cursed, "Shit, somebody needs to stay behind and stall them. I'll do it." They looked at the shy Hyuga when she answered and the kunoichi continued in a more confident tone, "I can handle this, you guys keep going." She took a defensive stance while her fingers glowed blue and watched the wizards complete a spell before they launched a wave of steel knives so dense the teenagers couldn't see through it. Shugo Haki Rakujuion Sho, protection of the 8 trigram 64 bombs. He nodded. His hands were a blur as they darted everywhere and left behind blue trails until a large net of chakra was formed, which deflected all the knives that would have hit them. "Hurry." The boys nodded and headed towards the chute and Naruto looked back while mumbling, "I really need to ask how she does that later." He jumped into the opening and gracefully slid down the chimney wall before landing next to Temujin, who said, "Finally, let's go." They rushed through the narrow passageway until coming into a room carved out of the mountain that somewhat resembled the inside of Hido's cathedral. The domed ceiling was over 200 feet high and had intricate paintings decorating every inch too, while the floor was tiled with multicolored marble and formed a mosaic of the sun. Large columns wider than most trees supported the ceiling and had carvings of various kings with strange writing underneath them, possibly detailing their history. The shinobi carefully observed the potential battlefield, but Temujin only had eyes for his former master. "I've come to stop you, Haido." The priest gave him a friendly smile while speaking in a kind tone. "Ah, there you are, Temujin. I don't know why you've decided to work with these savages, but return to my side and all will be forgiven." The blonde knight growled, "No, I've had enough of your lies and hollow promises. We can't create a utopia by conquering people, you just use it as a hollow excuse for expansion." Haido's laughter echoed throughout the chamber. "You think I am the only one, or the first to do so? This has been going on for centuries, boy. People are naturally disgusting and vile, but hate to think of themselves that way, so they validate their actions with a noble goal. Spreading culture and knowledge, creating a utopia, all of that is eloquent bullshit. Power is the only justification needed in this world, but only truly great men see that. Most are worms and need hide behind pretty words and false reasoning, simple sheep that need a shepherd to soothe their ego." The man finished and stared condescendingly at the teen as he swore, "Damn it, I'll kill you. You're no better than scum, the trash of the earth." Haido laughed eagerly when the teen finished. "I always expected you to turn against me. I was leading the raid that destroyed your village after all. You remember that, I'm sure, the night your parents died like cattle." The knight let out a roar and blindly charged his former master while unsheathing his sword. The blade extended to full length as he leapt forward and lifted it above his head, but as he brought the weapon down, Haido's fist pierced the right side of Temujin's chest. He casually tossed the young knight aside and lifted his bloody hand, revealing a small green gem. The priest crushed the gallows stone and chuckled while he turned away. "I love accomplishing two objectives with one move. Without a stone you are no longer a threat, and it appears I need your blood to access the mines." The man lifted his arm and reached out towards the far wall, but he suddenly pivoted and swatted his fist towards Naragui when the ferret tried to ambush him from a pillar. However, the animal disappeared in a puff of smoke and the Naruto took its place before catching the priest's wrist. He had a grim look on his face and a swirling ball of blue chakra in his palm, Rasengan. The shinobi thrust his jutsu forward and it easily shredded the priest's robes, however, it stopped at his stomach and couldn't damage the skin. Haido arrogantly smirked when the Chunin gave him a surprised look. "I've been practicing with Gelul energy longer than you've been alive, boy." He brought his fist down to pummel the blonde, but the Rasengan glowed brightly before exploding outwards and knocking the priest away from the wall. The man quickly regained his feet and tossed his ruined shirt aside while saying, "Renka, Kamaira, entertain the children while I secure our destiny." The man disappeared as Kiba's Gotsuaga passed through the spot he just stood and reappeared in front of the wall covered in complex seals. He smeared Temujin's blood on the symbols and they glowed white before a circle 15 feet wide rolled to the side. Torches automatically lit up when the pathway opened, revealing a long staircase that Haido casually walked down with a triumphant laugh. Shino observed the man and pushed his sunglasses into place while saying, "Naruto, take Temujin and go ahead to destroy the Gelul stones. I will remain behind with Kiba and Akamaru to deal with these two. Get ready, we shall create an opening for you to get through." The Uzumaki nodded as the blonde woman laughed. "That's rich, snot-noses brats like you wouldn't stand a chance even if I fought by myself. You may have killed Fugai, but I'm on a different level. We shall see about that." The Aburame lifted his arms and thousands of insects flew out before creating a black cloud that blocked the women's vision. Two Fuuma shuriken burst through the swarm and forced them to dodge, but when two blonde figures jumped through seconds later the women were able to react and easily intercepted them. Renka grabbed Naruto's neck and effortlessly snapped it with her right hand while Kamaira's sword stabbed through Temujin's stomach, but the teenagers both grinned after the fatal blows landed and disappeared in two puffs of smoke. The Fuuma shuriken initially thrown through the Kikaiku transformed into the blonde teenagers and they ran towards the staircase. Renka unsheathed her sword and threw it at the duo as they tried to escape, but a wall of wind rose up behind them and deflected the blade before she pulled it back using a chakra string. The cloud of bugs dispersed and Kiba grinned while mocking the purple armored knight as she sheathed her weapon. "So far I'm not impressed, lady. I know 10-year-olds that wouldn't have fallen for that." Akamaru barked tauntingly and she growled before charging the Inuzuka, but he retreated as hundreds of Kikaiku came forward and covered Renka. Lightning coursed over the woman's body, which killed Shino's insects as she skidded to a stop and pointed her palms towards both shinobi while streams of purple electricity arced between them. Tornado lightning. All the electricity surrounding the knight was channeled down her arms and several bolts of lightning arced towards the shinobi while spinning around each other, forming a twister nearly 15 feet wide. Akamaru jumped next to Kiba as he and Shino made identical seals before all three sunk into the ground. Renka cut off her attack and looked around the room with Kamira until a gray whirlwind burst out of the ground at her feet moments later. The blonde was thrown upwards and Kiba exited the spin before dropkicking her into Akamaru's Gatsuga as the dog emerged from the floor. The woman violently tumbled across the marble tiles until she crashed into a column, yet Renka was still able to roll away before the dog hit her with the attack again. Akamaru stopped his spin and landed on the wall before dropping back to the floor, where he growled at the woman as she rolled to her feet, but the dog couldn't find an exposed spot to attack. There weren't many places he could latch on because of the armor. The blonde charged towards him with her sword raised, covering ground at an alarming rate as Akamaru considered his next move. His dodging options were limited because of the wall next to him, and there weren't any vulnerable spots to attack. Seeing no other option, he lifted his leg and let out a stream of piss that hit the woman's eyes. Renka was disgusted as she stumbled backwards and wiped the urine covering her face away so it wouldn't drip into her mouth. Once the yellow liquid was gone, she opened her ringed eyes that were brimming with rage and yelled, "That was disgusting. Have you no honor in battle?" Kiba could only laugh at the woman as she wringed out her bangs that were soaked in piss. "Come on, it's more sterile than water. Besides, honor is for idiots. I fight to win." The woman's eyes narrowed and she was outlined by a green glow while her torso thickened and her entire body was covered by black hair. Her head grew larger and took an boxy shape until it looked like a gorilla's, while her arms lengthened and legs shortened. When Renka's knuckles scraped the floor, her muscles rapidly expanded until the transformed woman's limbs were thicker than Kiba's torso. A cocky grin spread across the foreigner's cheeks while she spoke in a deeper voice, "Then I shall fight to win too." The knight blurred forward before her large fist shattered the ground where Kiba and Akamaru just stood. The Inuzuka looked towards his partner as he whined, "Don't blame me, you're the one who pissed on her face." The dog barked in response and the feral Chunin replied, "I don't think that'll work, but we can give it a try." Renka charged the duo once more and they jumped onto the nearest pillar while Kiba yelled, "Hey lady, Akamaru says he's really sorry and wants to know if you'll change back into your human form. He promises not to do it again." "I'm going to rip you pathetic worms apart limb by limb," screamed the enraged woman as streaks of electricity flowed over her body. The boy looked over to his dog, "You were right buddy, it did buy us some time to gather the chakra we needed." They jumped off the pillar as the ape-like woman destroyed it with a bolt of electricity, and Kiba landed on top of Akamaru with his hand in a seal. Jinbu Kanbi Henge, Satoru, Human-Beast Combination Henge, Double-Headed Wolf. A large cloud of smoke covered the duo, but when it cleared, a 16-foot-tall two-headed wolf with pure white fur appeared in front of the woman while lightning flared around her body. Red eyes stared hungrily at the knight as lines of spit fell off its sharp teeth. But Renka wasn't intimidated, condensed all the electricity to a small point at the tip of her finger, Rage of the Thunder God. A bolt of lightning 8 feet wide was launched from her fingertip and vaporized the nearby stone. The wolf started weaving through the columns as the woman's spell followed and demolished them, but her attack was short-lived. The electricity faded out after 10 seconds. When the lightning vanished, the wolf pivoted and slid across the ground before lunging towards the knight while spinning at insane speeds as a deep voice growled out, "Garaga, wolf fang over fang." The pure white drill flew towards Renka as she launched a weaker blast of lightning, but it wasn't able to pierce the dense winds created by the jutsu, so she was forced to cancel her attack and jump left to avoid the drill, but a trail of saliva sliced into her side through the armor and left a deep gash. The ape-like woman hissed in pain and backflipped over the wolf when it came around for another pass before running across the room, but the living twister followed her movements perfectly. She pivoted to the right and jumped onto a pillar to avoid the two Inuzuka, but they weren't fooled and smashed through the column as she dropped to the ground. The knight weaved through the pillars while the wolf stayed on her trail, but when she circled one and broke the line of sight, the woman climbed up and hopped to a different column while the two-headed wolf continued straight. Renka began to think of a way to stop that thing when the pillar she was hiding on shattered. The ape-like woman was able to avoid the attack, but the Goroga created sharp blades of wind that extended beyond the physical attack, and one sliced her in half. The transformation faded as the blonde knight fell to the floor in 2 pieces and stared at the wolf in disbelief as it was obscured by a puff of smoke. Kiba and his dog walked out of the cloud as the feral Chunin pulled out a kunai. The woman tried to summon more power from the Galil stone, but nothing came and numbness overtook her body. She tried to call on any scrap of energy in order to kill this boy before death claimed her, but his dog burst forward and gripped one of her wrists before Kiba vanished and reappeared with his foot on her other arm. Renka's purple and violet eyes stared at the shinobi defiantly, but there was no emotion on his face while he slashed her throat. Kamaira looked at the ground as small holes formed in the stone and clouds of Kikaiku swarmed out. The woman jumped backwards to escape the insects as one of her rings glowed brightly and a wall of flames formed in front of her before exploding towards the destruction bugs. Many died in the blaze, but she didn't have time to gloat and turned around as Shino lunged forward with a kunai in his hand. The knight grabbed his outstretched wrist and twisted it to the side while delivering a brutal blow to his stomach, but the shinobi dissolved into a swarm of Kikaiku that covered her body. Another ring glowed red before the spell sword was engulfed in flames for several seconds, killing the insects, draining her chakra. Shino cocked his eyebrow after her latest Katen jutsu and took stock of his colony. He had lost a fifth of it already, and if Kamaira continued using her fire attacks the casualties would skyrocket. She could burn his Kikaiku before they had time to drain her chakra, so his main style of fighting was useless. It was a good thing an Aburame never relied on one trump card. The shinobi lifted his arm and insects poured out of his sleeves before forming two large needles that flew towards the woman from her sides. The knight stood her ground as the insects flew towards her and began scattering ash in the air while chanting quickly. She spread her arms out wide and waggled her fingers before two streams of fire rushed towards the destruction bugs. They scattered and avoided the attack before combining into one needle behind the woman, but Kamaira pulled a grape-sized ruby from one of her rings and threw it towards them while jumping away. The gem transformed into blood-red flames and the insects split up once more to avoid the growing fireball, but individual tongues of fire broke off and followed their movements. Small lights danced around the room as the magical flames chased the Kikaiku until they grouped up again and flew towards Kamaira, but she laughed while a wall of flames rose in front of her, forcing the insects to split up and fly around her while the fire did the same. The woman dropped the barrier and her eyes immediately widened when she saw Shino there with another kunai in his hand. However, despite her surprise, the knight was able to slap his wrist out wide and slash her sword towards his neck in the same motion. The Aburame managed to grab her sword arm, but she easily overpowered him and knocked him back with the hilt of her blade. Kamaira pointed her palm towards the downed shinobi as three rings on her fingers glowed orange, but before the spell was complete she grabbed her stomach and collapsed to the ground while groaning in pain. The foreigner tried to push herself up, but she let out an agonized scream and collapsed before asking, "What did you do to me?" The Aburame pushed himself up while saying, "Admittedly my close-range skills are lacking, so why would I attack you that way? Simple. Because my attacks were never meant to cause damage, they were a distraction so I could slip several assassin bugs onto you. My clan breeds them in a manner that keeps them dormant in our bodies while they feed off chakra, but when we place the insects on another person and break the connection they wake up and seek out their preferred food, human flesh." The quiet shinobi wiped the dust off his clothes and confidently pushed his sunglasses into place before continuing, "These small predators have burrowed into you and are now injecting a poison that liquefies your flesh before they suck it out and repeat the process. Of course, the insects we breed are more voracious when compared to those found in the wild. They usually kill their targets in less than 5 minutes. I see." Kamaira fought off the pain and stood up while calling on the energy of her Gelul stone. The woman's armor melded with her skin and turned black before her hair color changed to white as thick patches of fur grew over her breasts and hips. Large triangular ears sprung out the top of Kamaira's head while bat-like wings sprouted from her back until they stretched 8 feet across. The knight lifted her arms and they extended another foot as her fingers lengthened as well, creating gaps between her decorative rings while her feet morphed until they had 4 finger-like claws extending straight out with another one angled to the side. Kamaira ignored the severe pain racking her body and smiled at Shino, revealing a mouthful of dangerously sharp teeth, and spoke in a high-pitched voice, "Then I should kill you quickly. That appears to be an empty threat, nothing more than bluster coming from a dying foe." The Aburame stepped back into the shadows and his voice seemed to come from everywhere, "The more energy you expel the hungrier they get, and their gluttonous nature compensates for the limited numbers I can safely house. Eventually you will succumb to them, even if I die, but for that to happen you must find me." The transformed knight smirked, "That'll be easier than you think, brat," before flying towards the ceiling. Kamaira fought through the pain and managed to reach the domed ceiling before letting out a series of small sonar blasts. When the sound waves bounced off the walls and returned to her ears, the woman smirked and turned left while letting out a piercing shriek that distorted the air around her mouth. Shino fell from his hiding place and smashed into the ground as Kamaira slowly floated to the marble floor. The bat-like foreigner lifted her palm and one of the rings glowed purple before an ethereal black sword appeared in her hand. She stepped towards the Konohanin as he tried to recover from her attack and push himself up, but he couldn't find his balance and collapsed to the ground. Kamaira stopped next to the Aburame and lifting the strange weapon over her head, but before she could swing the blade down, "Haki Kushu" echoed through the chamber, and a pressurized blast of air smashed into her side. The transformed knight stood up while her pink and orange eyes angrily stared at the kunoichi who interfered. Hinata landed in front of her downed teammate and took a defensive Juken stance with a fierce glare in her Byakugan and said, "Stay away from my friend." Kamaira suppressed a wince and glowered at the blue-haired kunoichi while fighting down the panic rising in her chest. She would have to kill these whelps quickly and hope a priest could extract the nasty insect devouring her flesh. The bat-like woman charged the two with her ethereal sword ready to strike and the Hyuga burst forward to meet her rush. The knight smirked when the white-eyed Chunin got close and jumped into the air before throwing her sword towards Shino. Hinata gasped and shot a haki kushu towards the weapon, but it passed through the strange weapon before it slid into the Abarame's flesh. The insect user's body went limp as the sword disappeared, but moments later it burst into a swarm of insects that flew away while the real Shino stepped out of the shadows and leaned against a pillar to steady himself. The knight let out a growl as two more purple swords appeared in her hands, but moments later she collapsed to her knees and grabbed her stomach while letting out a blood-curdling wail. The Abarame weakly pushed his sunglasses up his nose before speaking, "It seems I forgot to mention that the assassin bugs lay eggs as they feed, and when these eggs are exposed to excess amounts of energy they hatch and grow at an accelerated rate before feasting with their parents." When he finished, the woman screamed in denial and her stomach began to churn visibly before dozens of bugs burst out of her stomach. Kamaira fell backwards and lay still while her red eyes glossed over and blankly stared at the beautiful murals on the ceiling. Kiba walked over to his teammates and stared at the bat-like woman's mangled corpse. "That was gross, Shino. And effective, victories are the only thing that measure the efficacy of a technique. Besides, some may consider urinating on an opponent even more foul." The Inuzuka ignored the bug user's response and looked at their female teammate. "So what happened up there, Hinata?" The girl's fair skin turned slightly green as she answered, "The man Naruto-kun transformed arrived and started fighting the people on the surface. I couldn't watch it so I came down here." Kiba put a comforting hand on her shoulder while Shino asked, "Should we go help our blonde friends or see what is happening outside?" Hinata looked at the door in the far wall longingly for several moments before tearing her eyes away. "Naruto-kun can handle himself, and he has Temujin with him. The fight between the Toads and Dragon has moved far enough away that the foreign army has started pushing the Sunanin back again. They need our help more." Teammate nodded at each other before heading back the way they came while silently wishing their comrade luck. Bunta squinted his good eye and stared at the colossal dragon perched on a mountain in the distance while sunlight glinted off his lustrous scales. The creature appeared relaxed as he lounged on the mountainside, perfectly confident the summons would prove no challenge to his awesome strength. But Gamabunna fought the Kyubi no Kitsune in single combat and the dragon wouldn't be able to scare him into making mistakes. "Fire Namar wants to pull us away so they can start fighting over here again. But if that bastard wants us to move then he'll need to do it himself. Start attacking the ships and people. As long as we're over here the Sunanin can rest and prepare." Gamma Hero snorted good-naturedly, "Fighting to help San Shinobi? Can't say I ever saw us doing this, but stranger things have happened." The Toad launched a drill of wind into the foreign army that created a crater 30 feet wide before performing a set of hand seals while Bunta covered the field with Toad oil. Gamaken ignited the flammable liquid with a stream of fire, and when the blaze reached its peak Gamma Hero called out, "Futon, Datapa," before launching a wall of wind that fanned the flames and caused the fires to spread all over the battlefield and towards the ships. Before the firestorm reached the wooden vessels, Fire Namar launched a cone of fire from above that absorbed the flames and created another pit of magma. Wizards appeared all over the battlefield and began teleporting groups of soldiers further away from the giants as they faced off once again. Gamabunta let out a grunt as he watched the dragon land on the other side of the pit and said, "Get him up in the air and shooting fire at us again. When he's up there we'll play some Leap Toad like the good old days." His brother's eyes lit up when the orange toad finished and Gamaken said, "I shall do my best, but don't count on me too much, I'm very clumsy you see." Fire Namar listened to the three toads' plan and sat there arrogantly. No matter what they tried it wouldn't be enough, nothing was strong enough to kill him. Still, the dragon was getting bored just waiting around, and if he didn't act soon the damn wizards would use the seal and force him to. The beast growled at the thought of being controlled by lesser beings and exploded forward. The summons looked surprised when Fire Namar burst into motion and the dragon was able to knock one of Gamma Hero's swords away before they could react, which forced the Sunanin to abandon their position lest they be crushed by the massive blade. The green toad was knocked off balance and the enslaved creature slashed forward with his claw, but Gamaken threw a shield and diverted the blow. Hero was able to escape after the attack missed, so the dragon turned and charged towards the magenta summon with a roar. Bunta tried to knock it off course with a Teppadoma, But Fire Namar didn't even stumble and continued rushing towards Gamaken. However, the horned toad's shield curved back into his hands before the creatures collided. The dragon's horns dented the metal and pushed the summon back nearly 50 feet. But the shield didn't break and Gamaken lifted his Sasumata like a spear and stabbed towards Fire Namar's eyes. The creature tilted his head and let the heavy blade bounce off its thick scales before launching a stream of fire at the toad's feet. Ken was forced to jump straight up as the flames melted the earth beneath him, and the dragon prepared to launch another firestorm at the airborne toad when Gamabunta jumped onto his back and sent it off course. Fire Namar let out a roar and unfolded his massive wings, which flung the boss toad off his back, and took to the skies. The dragon flew through the air and launched streams of white-hot flames at his opponents that melted earth. The summons nimbly hopped around the pools of lava and avoided the cones of fire until there was a giant pool of molten rock in the middle of the battlefield. Bunta looked over and realized that some invaders had slipped past them and growled, "Let's go boys, we're on the clock here." Gamaken crouched down before jumping as high as he could. When he reached the apex, Gamahiro landed on top of him and pushed off to go even higher. Gamabunta hopped onto a nearby mountain while his brothers made the first leaps, and when Hiro flew past him, the boss toad pushed off the mountain with his powerful legs. Bunta used Gamahiro's back as a platform and jumped above the dragon before firing a Tepidoma to adjust his course. The summon rotated in midair and landed on the monstrosity's back, which caused it to waver momentarily. Gamabunta grabbed his Tonto and put the sharp blade on Fire Namar's neck before he grabbed the dull side with his left hand to stay on the creature. The toad got his shoulders under the beast's wings before pulling tightly on the knife, which angled the dragon's wings up and sent them flying towards the ground. Bunta struggled against Fire Namar's awesome strength, but he realized the glowing red lake was getting closer, and when he could feel the heat radiated, he let go of his Tonto and jumped off the dragon, pushing him into the molten rock. The toad cleared the fiery liquid, but he landed clumsily and rolled over 100 yards before regaining his feet. Gamabunta formed a hand seal and shot a stream of cold water into the lava, which hissed as it started to cool, but Fire Namar breached the surface with a roar. Molten rock tripped off the monster's body as he clawed at the bank and began to pull himself out. Bunta shot him with the water stream and the lava turned black as it hardened, trapping the dragon inside, but his fierce yellow eyes stared at them hatefully from inside the makeshift prison. Gamahiro retrieved his lost katana from the ground and coated both of them in futon chakra as his older brother imprisoned the beast. The toad combined his swords so the blades were parallel and the winds circling around his weapons merged, forming an intense twister that let out a screech. Hiro rushed towards the dragon and pulled the swords back, but when he got close, the rocks around Fire Namar's mouth cracked and its jaws opened. The summon leapt forward with all his might as the dragon charged up another cone of fire and managed to thrust his blade through the back of the beast's mouth before it launched the attack. The flames mixed with the wind and created an explosion that destroyed Fire Namar's head and knocked the toad on his butt. He watched the fierce creature limply slide back into the pool of magma with one of his katana, while the other one was sent flying away from the superheated liquid. Gamahiro dragged himself across the ground and picked up his sword while his brothers stumbled over. The other two flopped onto the ruined earth next to him and the Gamma Trinity laughed heartily before Bunta said, "And that's why I'm the boss toad." Gamahiro lazily picked up his remaining blade and pointed to the blood, "But I was the one who delivered the killing blow. I jumped onto his back and rode him into a lake of magma that almost fried me to a crisp. All you had to do was stab the thing. It seems you two forget the multiple times you would have died if it wasn't for me. Despite the fact that I'm incredibly clumsy." Gamabunta snorted, "Bah, you two are better at bragging than fighting." The boss toad looked at Gara over the silent battlefield. "Sorry kid, we can barely move, you guys are on your own now." The summons disappeared in massive clouds of smoke and the foreigners got over their shock after witnessing Fire Namar get killed, even if it was 3 giant toads. All was not lost though, and they began to push forward when they heard a loud voice projected above the battlefield. Heavy soldiers hold the middle, light units spread out wide and attack the flanks. The invaders carried out their orders and charged towards the Suna Shinobi while cannons fired towards the mountains around them to create rock slides, but a monotone voice echoed through the valley, "Ryusa Bakaryu," and wall of sand rose up from the earth that blocked the cannonballs before rushing forward. The foreigners turned to run as the tidal wave of sand continued growing until it was over 90 feet tall and reached the lava, where it turned to molten glass. Gara let it flow over the superheated liquid and began sweating from the effort needed to control such a dense material. The wave rushed over knights who weren't lucky enough to get teleported away and the sounds of screams washed over the battlefield before explosions rang out in the distance. "Quickly, angle the ships to hit the mountains around those bastards. Crush them with a rock slide." "Yes, Admiral." A soldier wearing light blue armor started to turn the wheel when Kikaiku bugs swarmed out of the vents and the room erupted into chaos. Knights and wizards screamed wildly, began throwing themselves into nearby walls and people to crush the insects, but in their panic the controls for the ship's hovering capabilities were smashed as red lights began flashing around the room. The admiral threw off his insect-covered gold armor to buy precious seconds and grabbed the wheel. He fought off panic and exhaustion while turning the ship so it wouldn't ram any others, but the man knew his was doomed. He fell to the ground and passed out while the bugs poured through the hallways and up onto the main deck before flying into the clothes of a teenager standing on top of the mast. The boy hopped down to the deck and jumped over the ship's rails before running down the side. Shino pushed off and landed gracefully as the foreign vessel sailed into a mountain, causing boulders to crash down from the slopes above that reduced it to splinters. The Aburame pushed his sunglasses back into place as light reflected off the lenses and said, "It seems you got your rocks light, Admiral." The boy looked around hastily after finishing. "That was terrible. It seems my one-liners are lacking. At least nobody witnessed it." Yahoo! Kiba's Gotsuga tore down the hallways of the ship, easily smashing through shields that were raised as a meager defense. The boy came out of his spin and took a sharp left down the hallway before leaping in the air. He avoided a knight stab while performing a complete rotation and grabbed the unfortunate man's neck midway through, causing it to snap when he completed the spin. The feral shinobi landed gracefully and continued running on all fours, following the smell of grease and burnt metal until he came to the end of a long hallway. Kiba opened the door quietly and realized it was a large boiler room where coal was being thrown into furnaces that powered a strange-looking device in the center. The Inuzuka followed the many pipes coming off of it and found the ones that connected to the furnaces before pulling out several kunai and a stack of exploding tags. The boy jumped to the ceiling and used the various pipes to sneak around while planting the explosives onto the tubes connecting the machine to the furnace. When the task was complete, he dropped down in the middle of the surprised workers before running towards the door. After exiting the room, Kiba formed the ram seal as explosions shook the vessel and he was able to run past the panicking foreigners as they scrambled to save their ship. The Chunin arrived on deck and jumped onto the mast where he cut a large triangle out of the sail before running to the edge and jumping over. He brought all three corners of the material together in his hands and let the cloth catch the wing, forming a makeshift parachute that slowed his descent. The teen landed safely on the ground while fires overtook the ship behind him, and sat down as fatigue set in. He let out a deep breath and watched the vessel exploded into splinters of wood before saying, "This is what I get for wanting an exciting mission. I should have told Naruto to get lost." Hinata used her Byakugan to scout the ship while sticking to the side with chakra. She located a Gelel stone underneath the main engine room and watched as heat radiated down from the engines and fed the glowing gem, which in turn gave off enough energy to power the machines that allowed the ship to hover. She slid back down the curved wood before standing on the underside of the ship and concentrated chakra into her index finger as a blue orb the size of a grape formed at the tip. Hinata pointed it towards the wood as a short beam of chakra shot out and easily sliced into the hull before she cut out a square big enough for her to fit through. When the girl stepped onto the wood, a seal array lit up and froze her in place as three wizards teleported into the room. "Ah, we've caught a nice prize for ourselves. We'll enjoy you thoroughly after the battle." The kunoichi didn't respond to the mage's threat. She was too busy studying the chakra flow through the seals in her body. The men began waving their arms as sweet music began to play, which caused the Hyuga to feel sleepy, but Hinata fought through the drowsiness and found the place where the seal connected with her chakra. She overloaded the point and the seal shattered as the kunoichi exploded forward with her Byakugan flaring and hands glowing blue. The wizards tried to switch spells as the girl charged them and didn't flinch as she neared. She struck the closest one in his chest and pushed all the stored energy in her palm through the thick layer of chakra onto the man's skin and watched his heart explode. The two other wizards looked on in surprise as she sharply turned, and the one closest to her lifted his palm. A ring began glowing as a shield of fire formed in front of him, but Hinata stopped while shoving her hand forward. Haki Kushu, the air blast broke through his barrier and pushed the wizard into the wall as the other mage finished casting his spell. A whip of lightning formed in his hands before snaking towards the kunoichi, but she slid under it before rolling away from the follow-up as it smashed into the wood next to her. Hinata rushed forward with her palms glowing and thrust her right arm forward. The foreigner ducked, but she adjusted her strike while concentrating the chakra into her fingertips, and they hit the middle of his forehead. His frontal lobe was turned to mush and the kunoichi aimed her fingers at the recovering wizard as a condensed chakra beam shot out. It was nullified by his stone skin, but smoke quickly started to form and the foreigner screamed before it gave way and her attack pierced his heart, searing the muscle. The kunoichi walked towards the stone and planted several explosive seals around the container holding it. She quickly slipped out the hole as the tags started to burn and ran away as fire burst out of the ship's bottom before it started to sink towards the earth. So what do you think is wrong? The young blonde soldier in powder blue armor looked at the captain wearing ornate white mail. The black-haired man put a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder before speaking in a relaxed tone. Probably nothing, lad. Every once in a while areas in the power circuit get overheated, so we need to switch to the secondary system. They walked up the steps onto the catwalk before seeing a dog at the end trying to pull open the main circuit board. No, bad dog. Get away from that. The captain drew his sword and rushed towards the animal as it yanked the door open before turning and lifting a leg up. It peed into the box and sparks flew out before a fire started and quickly burned through the wires. Akamaru barked and leapt off the catwalk before running back into a vent where the screen was pushed off. Damn it, what do we do, sir? There's nothing we can do, son. This is one of the intersections between the primary and secondary power systems, and it's completely fried. Both circuits are destroyed, so there's no place for the energy to go. After the man finished, the lights went out. And he pulled out a flare that emitted a yellow glow. We need to abandon ship. After watching 4 ships get destroyed, the foreign invaders had no heart left for the fight, and a loud voice was projected over the battlefield. Retreat. The remaining ship's cannons started booming to cover the soldiers as some of the fleet turned around, but a wave of gold dust came from that direction that pushed them back. The metallic powder made the ships crash into each other and crush themselves as waves of tsunanin poured over the mountain. The fresh shinobi made quick work of the battered foreigners, and when some tried to surrender, they were mercilessly slaughtered. After seeing there was no way out, several wizards transformed themselves and surrounding knights into birds that flew away. It was a fruitless effort though. Many were killed as puppets flew into the air and chased them down ruthlessly. Only a few managed to escape. There were still many more foreigners left on the ground, and the elites were determined to escape or die gloriously. They organized those left into a large triangle with all sides facing outwards towards the enemies before charging the thinnest spot on the line and clashing with the shinobi. The triangle morphed as some soldiers branched out into smaller triangles that engaged the enemy in front while the men in back watched the rear. The formation managed to trap small groups of tsunanin, but it was all for naught. The ground at the invaders' feet dissolved into sand that began twisting around and sucked the soldiers in before crushing them. Gar looked up after completing the attack and bowed after seeing his father walk towards him. Excellent work, my son, I am proud of you. The redhead bowed towards the cage. Thank you. The man waved him off while looking at the massive cathedral as thin bolts of lightning began sparking between the towers. Gar looked up and saw what was happening before saying, this one looks weaker than the last. It probably didn't have enough time to fully recharge. We should still end it now before that attack is fired. Kaze no Kuni has seen enough carnage this past week. The Kazekage looked over to his son. How much sand do you have available? Gaara blinked before considering the question. Quite a bit, I've been creating more since arriving. The older redhead nodded, good, and started jumping towards the floating building. Follow me then. The Jinchuriki followed his father until they were underneath the airborne cathedral before riding a platform of sand up to the building while the Kazekage floated on gold. The two redheads paid no attention to the knights and wizards trying to stop them as their elements of choice blocked all the attacks with ease before slaughtering the foreigners. The Ondaime looked over to his son when they reached one of the smaller spires. I shall go on to the other side. When you see the signal, use the Ryusa Bakaryu. What is the signal? Asked Gar. It'll be obvious. The Tsunachuni nodded as the man disappeared in a blur. The Kazekage formed several hundred tiny balls of gold that began whizzing around him rapidly and killed any foreigner foolish enough to get close. Eventually the Yondaime arrived and summoned all the gold he could muster while clapping his hands together. The precious metal grouped together until it was higher than the cathedral, and seconds later another wave of sand that matched its size formed on the other side. The two jutsu rushed towards each other before smashing against the building, engulfing it completely, and the waves seemed to battle for dominance after meeting until there was a large cracking noise and they crashed together violently. The two powders mixed while falling to the earth, revealing chunks of white marble and gold, and the Kazekage smiled beneath his veil until the levitating platform shook violently before falling. Gaara lifted his arms and a large platform of sand maintained its elevation while the colossal chunk of earth slowly drifted towards the mountain. His father gathered an insane amount of chakra while calling upon their Kekkei Genkai, and the mounds of gold dust collected under the valuable pieces of marble. The most powerful shinobi in Sunagaku summoned every ounce of his considerable strength, but he could not support the immense weight, and the shattered cathedral continued falling with the earth beneath it until his son pointed his palms towards the gold dust. Small trails of electricity surrounded the Jinchuriki's body and the Kazekage felt the burden lessening, but it still wasn't enough. The chunks of marble and gold continued their descent, but Gaara knew how important that potential wealth was, and vile yellow chakra exploded out of his body as the streaks of electricity grew larger. The Kazekage looked on in surprise as the sand underneath their feet sped towards the falling cathedral and gathered onto the material to help support it. With his youngest child's help, the Yondaime was able to safely guide the chunks of marble to the ground as the piece of earth crashed into a mountain. Chunks of rock were sent flying everywhere as the falling platform shattered on impact and completely demolished the mountainside. The earth shook violently and caused the damaged peak to implode while creating avalanches of rock throughout the mountain range. Hundreds of Doton users banded together and created a massive earth dome that protected them from the rock slides and falling boulders until the crashing noises outside their barrier stopped. The hemisphere opened up and slid back into the earth while the Suna Shinobi looked over the ruined landscape. Pools of blood drained into fissures that opened up along the valley floor, and boulders the size of Gamabunta were strewn everywhere. Many mountains were missing large portions where the cannonballs impacted, and the small forests that were in the low elevations were completely leveled or burned down. The battle had scarred this area of the land and it would never be the same, but they had won and pushed the invaders out. The valley had been devastated, yet, it was still theirs, and the shinobi cheered when they saw Gaara walk over with his father. The teenager was speechless when the Jounin he commanded started cheering for him specifically, and the rest of the ninja followed their lead. Gaara tried to understand the foreign emotions as they washed over him, but after a few moments he decided to enjoy it and figure things out later, although he knew it was better than the sensation that followed a particularly challenging kill. It continued on for a moment before dying off, and the Kazekage raised his hand. Shinobi of Sunagakuer, today is a momentous day, a glorious achievement to be remembered in our history. The Yondaime was forced to stop when another loud cheer erupted from the crowd, but when it died down he continued, "We faced down a foreign army attempting to conquer this great country by ourselves. We pushed them back and avenged the fallen souls of the civilians they massacred. We changed the course of history today." The Sand Nin cheered loudly when the man paused and savored the high of winning a massive battle, which was only increased by their leader's words. The Kazekage smiled and saw an opportunity to bypass opponents in the village. Right now these men were his completely. He led them onto the field and achieved victory today. It was his leadership that guided the country through this period. He placed the samurai and planned the entire country's defense. Now it was time to reap the political rewards, and the Yondaime would begin immediately. This would have been impossible without Gaara, and if nobody here objects, I would like to offer him a promotion to High Jounin. The Sunanin let out a cheer before chanting Gaara's name so loudly the few detractors that still loathed the Jinchuriki couldn't be heard, and his father smiled while clapping the teenager on his shoulder. "Then it is with great pride that I promote Sabaku no Gaara to High Jounin. Now, let us tend to those still living and honor the dead that sacrificed their lives for this country's freedom. We shall camp here for the night and perform the necessary rituals before leaving at dawn tomorrow, so attend to any business you may have." The gathered shinobi began to spread out as Gaara walked over to the Konohanin. "Thank you for the assistance. Despite what my father said, your contributions were invaluable." Shino pushed his sunglasses into place before answering, "It was no problem, Gaara-san. It is the purpose of an alliance after all. By providing mutual assistance we can build lasting bonds between our village, and that is important." "Why, you ask?" "I didn't," said Gaara in a monotone voice while forming a miniature fly swatter of sand above his palm. Shino stopped his monologue and coughed nervously while reliving flashbacks of his last spar with the Jinchuriki, who faced the other members of Team 8. "Where is Naruto in that night?" Kiba laughed at his bug using Team 8 and turned towards Gaara, but before he could say anything the peak of the mountain containing the Gallo mines disappeared as a pillar of white light shot towards the sky. The dog user sighed and watched the light show with everyone else on the field. "He's right over there." The two blondes followed the twisted laughter echoing through the hallway and found Hido standing in the middle of a vast cavern that had a polished stone floor with strange designs carved into it. Enormous clusters of Gelul stones jutted out of the walls while massive stalagmites and stalactites of the green gems grew from the floor and ceiling. The priest raised his arms as a green glow outlined his body, and the jewels in the cavern resonated with the power he was emitting. White tendrils of energy flowed into Hido and he grew 8 inches as his arms lengthened until they reached the middle of his thighs. His muscles bulged and stretched his skin as it morphed into green scales, while a tail sprouted from the base of his spine before growing 4 feet in length. Deep ridges formed on the foreigner's abdomen while taking on a cream hue before the greenish-white energy aura he was emitting faded, signaling the transformation was complete. The man stretched his new body and flexed his muscles while cackling, "Amazing, I've never felt so powerful. With it I shall create my own country in these lands before expanding out to forge an empire unmatched by any before it." Nobody shall be able to resist my limitless power. Naruto growled angrily as he uncovered the sharingan. We'll see about that. Haido faced them like he was regarding insects while a large ebony mace appeared in his right hand. I doubt that, child. The foreigner seemed to disappear and the two blondes jumped away as the spiked head of his mace smashed the ground where they were just standing, sending shards of stone ricocheting through the cavern. The priest pivoted and faced the Chunin while his tail whipped out, striking Temujin in the face before he landed. The injured knight tumbled away as Naruto lunged towards the transformed man who lifted his weapon to defend, but the attack was a feint and the blonde hopped right before stabbing towards the foreigner's head. Haido sneered when the boy slipped behind his guard and leaned backwards before watching the red blade pass in front of his face. The reptilian priest smashed his tail into Naruto's chest before he recovered from the miss, and the Chunin rolled across the stone after the strike landed until he crashed into a stalagmite of yellow crystals and collapsed to the floor. Haido rushed forward and used his mace to crush the boy's head while he tried to push himself up, but the man frowned after the attack connected. He didn't feel the gratifying squish after popping an opponent's skull with his mace, which was the main reason he used the weapon. Naruto's body vanished in a puff of smoke and he appeared next to the cold-blooded foreigner with a swirling ball of chakra in his palm. Rasengan. Haido laughed arrogantly while the chakra orb ground uselessly against his skin and backhanded the shinobi, but it turned out to be another clone and disappeared in a puff of smoke before a red blade coated in wind cut off the priest's hand. Sickly orange chakra began to spread and eat his flesh, but green energy flared around the putrid substance and quickly destroyed it before replacing the lost body part. Haido lifted his new hand and grinned condescendingly. Don't you realize that I can't be killed, you insignificant whelp? The reptilian man laughed as Naruto grit his teeth. I feel rather stupid for asking that question. A savage never learns his lesson after all. Temujin dropped down from the ceiling with his sword in his left hand and slashed towards his mentor's neck, but the strike was somewhat clumsy and Haido easily sent the blow out wide with his tail before delivering a brutal punch to the knight's wounded chest. The reptilian man snorted derisively and faced his former apprentice. It's even more pathetic when a civilized man is seduced by the dark fruits of savagery. Did you really think that attack would wound me? Without the Galil stone you're nothing more than a bug, but it seems you've forgotten that. Naruto growled as he watched the transformed man gloat over Temujin and covered his sharingan. It would be impossible to keep up with his normal power. The Jinchuriki ran forward as orange chakra burst out of his skin and took on the form of a one-tailed fox. Haido turned as potent killing intent flooded the room, but he couldn't react to Naruto's enhanced speed in time and was sent careening into the wall after the blonde shoulder checked him. Stone collapsed on top of him and formed a pile as the feral Chunin shot a claw forward and pulled him out. He lifted the priest into the air and let the toxic chakra eat away at his whole body, but with a roar the transformed man freed an arm and summoned his mace before slashing through the chakra. Haido fell to the ground as the Galil stones in the room glowed brightly and fed their energy into him. A green cloak surrounded the foreigner's body and expunged the Kyuubi's chakra before healing his wounds, and he stood up unharmed seconds later. The priest charged towards Naruto with his mace raised high and performed an overhead strike, but the Jinchuriki raised his saber and easily countered before pushing the foreigner's weapon out wide with a flick of his wrist. The reptilian man's eyes widened as his attack was easily countered, and he couldn't react before the crimson blade pierced his throat. Haido coughed up blood when the saber was pulled out and limply fell backwards, but he grinned before hitting the ground and twisted as his tail whipped out. Naruto was sent flying when the appendage smacked into his chest, and before he could recover Haido appeared next to him and kicked him towards the ceiling. The blonde twisted in midair and faced the reptilian man as he jumped before letting out a roar. The shockwaves knocked Haido away as the Jinchuriki landed on the ceiling and exploded towards his opponent, but the priest jumped backwards and Naruto smashed into the floor, shattering the stones and creating a small crater where he landed. The shinobi's tail waved slowly behind him while his red eye stared coldly at the transformed foreigner, but Haido appeared undaunted by the Jinchuriki's strength and laughed confidently. You possess an interesting power, boy, but mine is unlimited, and I can be healed before your attack is even finished. You cannot win. I don't have a problem with supply either, asshole. The blonde grit his teeth while thinking, but using it too long gets to me. He pushed that thought aside before dashing towards his opponent. The foreigner braced himself as the red blur approached and parried the stab with the head of his mace, but the feral blonde grinned and spun to the right while slashing his sword upwards, leaving a trail of black as that impaired Haido's vision. The man swung his mace through the cloud, but he didn't hit anything and turned around to see an orange Rasengan the size of a grapefruit rushing towards his head. The jutsu twisted his face around itself, but couldn't pierce his skull because the damage healed as quickly as it happened, and the man was able to deliver a kick to Naruto's side that pushed him back. The orange chakra lingering on Hido's cheek slowly dissipated as he watched the Chunin stand up before smirking. "Please child, you'll have to do better than that." Narugui watched the Jinchuriki rush towards the reptilian priest and move through the field of Gelul stones before sticking his head out next to Temujin. "Why are you not out there helping Naruto?" The knight looked up at the ferret with surprise on his features, but it quickly turned to guilt and despair. Hido was right, without the Gelul stones I'm powerless, I'd just be in his way. You have the blood of the royal family coursing through your veins. These gems naturally respond to your will while he has to forcefully call on a bastardized form of their power. Just ask and you shall receive. The ferret stuck its head back into the crystals when it was finished and Naruto was struck by a kick from Hido that sent him skipping across the ground until he stopped near Temujin. He looked over at the knight and smiled while pushing himself up. "This guy is tougher than he looks, but I can definitely take him." The armored blonde was about to respond when Naruto jumped towards Hido once more. The knight grabbed one of the gems growing from the stone next to him while asking in a desperate voice, "Please, give me strength to right my wrongs." Suddenly he felt re-energized and could breathe easier as the wound on his chest healed instantly. A gentle green glow surrounded Temujin, and he could feel the energy coursing wildly through his pathways, although he knew it could still be controlled with the slightest thought. The red-eyed knight stood up and grabbed his sword before disappearing from the spot he was standing. Hido was forced to disengage from Naruto's saber and jump backwards when his former apprentice appeared next to him. The priest turned and blocked Temujin's slash with the shaft of his mace, but Naruto took advantage and formed a Rasengan. He jumped over Hido's tail as it whipped out and thrust his jutsu into the priest's back. The orb easily shredded the foreigner's flesh, but like the other one it couldn't penetrate any deeper. Naruto grit his teeth as the dangerous tail snapped towards him and let the attack explode outwards, sending Hido spinning through the air. The reptilian man smashed into a wall and stones collapsed on top of him, but he jumped out with a roar and charged the two while summoning his mace. Temujin met the charge and used his glowing blade to block the priest's overhead swing before Naruto ran under his fellow blonde's arm and swung his blade towards Hido's neck. The transformed foreigner couldn't disengage in time and the saber slashed through his throat, but to him it was only a flesh wound and he ignored the blood pouring down his torso. The reptilian priest avoided Temujin's follow-up stab by hopping to the left and pivoted to block Naruto's slash with his mace, but after parrying the strike his former pupil's blade stabbed through his stomach. Hido grit his teeth and pushed the shinobi away before turning around causing the knight's blade to cut through half of his abdomen and smashed his mace into Temujin's side. The armored blonde knew the attack wounded him after seeing his fresh blood dripping off the mace's spikes, but he felt no pain at all and easily stood up. The knight watched Naruto grab his former master with a chakra claw and drag him around the chamber before throwing him towards a large Gelul stone sticking out of the wall. The 6-foot gem impaled Hido as he smashed into the stone and tried to extricate himself while the Jinchuriki jumped next to Temujin. "This could go on forever. We need to get a fatal hit in before one of us makes a mistake." The taller blonde nodded as the reptilian pulled himself off the gem and collapsed to his hands and knees while the wound healed. "I agree, and you have a better chance of hitting him than me. Would you be able to create one of your spiraling spheres from Gelul energy if I supplied it?" Naruto shrugged and held up his right palm. "I don't see why not. Channel some into my hand." Temujin started funneling the energy into Naruto's left hand while an orange Rasengan with a 3-foot diameter appeared in his right one. A swirling green orb formed over his left palm and grew until it was the size of a regular Rasengan before the Chunin nodded. "That should do it. Just create an opening and I'll finish this." Temujin nodded as Hido's hands glowed brightly before he launched beams of Gelul energy towards them, determined to keep the blondes at a distance where numbers didn't mean as much. Naruto jumped to the side but Temujin was undeterred and simply raised his palm into the air before all the blasts flowed into it. "Get behind me." The knight charged towards his former master and let out a battle cry, but Hido quick-stepped backwards and maintained the space between them. The armored blonde put on a burst of speed and closed the gap, but when he got close the reptilian man's tail whipped him in the face. However, the knight felt no pain and the powerful strike hardly slowed him. Temujin slashed his blade towards Hido's neck and the man ducked underneath it while hopping backwards, yet, that's exactly what the knight expected and he lunged forward, tackling the reptilian man. The two foreigners tumbled across the stone floor before the priest threw the teenager off, but he was prone on the ground and open to an attack. Naruto slammed the orange Rasengan into the Hido's torso and the jutsu only damaged the outer layer of his skin like before. However, it also kept the transformed man pinned to the ground and he couldn't escape from the Jinchuriki's brute strength. The shinobi's predatory red eye stared at the reptilian foreigner struggling to break free. "This is for all the innocents you slaughtered while chasing your own selfish ambition." Gelul Rasengan. The jutsu slammed into Hito's face and easily outpaced his healing, drilling through flesh and bone like paper before his skull burst, splattering red and gray liquid across the stone. "Try getting up now, bastard." Hito stayed limp as the green glow surrounding his body faded and Naragui hopped out of a patch of crystals on the wall. "Nicely done, now it's time to finish the job. Swipe some of your blood over the central swirl in the room." The knight started walking over as the ferret continued, "Understand, doing this will bring you to the empty dimension with the Galil stone. There's no coming back." Temujin nodded as he wiped his armored thumb over a patch of blood left over from the healed wound on his side. "I can only hope it atones for my sins." Naruto looked over his shoulder as he walked away while Naragui explained what to do next and wondered if he should try to stop the knight, but he remembered the curiosity in Gaara's eyes after hearing there was something in the mountain powerful enough to the course of battle. The blonde knew the Galil stones needed to be destroyed to achieve peace. Wars would be fought over the right to control their power. Temujin looked back over his shoulder and made eye contact with the Chunin before they nodded towards each other. Naruto waited for Naragui and walked up the stairs while the knight wiped his blood over the swirl in the center of the room before a small section of the floor under his feet twisted up until it was 7 feet above the ground. An altar slowly rose in front of the armored blonde as a complex pattern appeared on its surface. Temujin used his body as a conduit to form a connection between the rune and Galil stones before lines of intricate seals expanded to cover the floor. The knight looked to the exit one more time and softly said, "Thank you, Naruto. Without you I would have continued walking that wicked path. Hopefully this can atone for some of the wrongs I committed in Hito's name, although I know it will never be enough." The boy closed his eyes as the Galil stones glowed white and a pillar of light shot up around the dais. "Mom, Dad, I hope you're smiling down on me. I know that I probably won't go to the same place as you, but know that I'm sorry for helping your killers." Naruto stopped walking and looked down the staircase grimly while gritting his teeth when the mountain above them disappeared and a pillar of white light shot towards the open sky. "I'm sorry, but there's no other way. The seal needs the stones to create enough power to open a dimensional rift, but they generate too much to contain, and once the seal is activated there's no time to escape." The blonde looked down to see Naragui was despondently staring at the stairs and ran towards them while shouting, "I can't leave him there to die like this." The expanding white barrier forced him to stop at the bottom and call out to the knight, "Temujin, I'm coming in to get you. It's impossible, you'll only die with me and I don't want that. With this I can start making up for my past mistakes and earn God's forgiveness in the afterlife." Naruto growled as orange chakra exploded around him and 3 tails formed, the most he could use without losing his mind. The Jinchuriki fought down the feral instincts raised by the chakra and focused on the blonde foreigner trapped inside the energy. "How many times do I need to tell people that I'm Uzumaki fucking Naruto, and I never leave a comrade behind?" The Jinchuriki rotated the orange chakra cloak until it appeared a giant Rasengan was swirling around his body, and with a roar he exploded towards the barrier. 3 tails of the Kyuubi's potent chakra allowed him to grind through the Galil energy, and 15 seconds later Naruto burst through the other side before rolling violently across the ground until he stopped next to Temujin. The knight's eyes shot open for a moment before anger distorted his features. "Why did you do that?" he yelled furiously, but the foreigner stopped for a moment before continuing in a defeated tone, "Now you'll die because of me." Naruto ignored the armored blonde while saying, "Summon some of that Galil energy if you can, this stuff is corrosive." Temujin looked at the shinobi's unwavering red eye and felt his determination grow. "Right." The knight lifted his arm and a green cloak surrounded his body before Naruto grabbed him and swirled the chakra around the two of them. The light was rapidly closing in on the blondes as Naruto channeled the Kyuubi's chakra to his feet and shouted, "Hold on," before they burst forward, leaving cracks in the raised dais. The barrier was denser this time around so the progress was slower, and Naruto could tell they were about to stall. "We're not going to make it," cried Temujin. "Shut up," roared the Jinchuriki, and the orange shell expanded before he weakened the top while calling on more of Kyuubi's power. Twisting blades of the Baiju's chakra burst outwards and cleared a path for the two, which allowed them to fly out and crash into the stairs outside of the barrier. The ancient ferret looked down at the two blondes when the light disappeared moments later. "That was by far the stupidest thing I've ever seen anybody do, and I can't even remember how old I am." "Shut up, you stupid cat." Naruto and Naragui looked towards Temujin with surprise before the knight passed out. He nodded aside as she watched Naruto concentrate on the chakra spinning around the point of his index finger. She was so excited when the blonde ran up to her right after climbing out of the chute, but her romantic fantasies were crushed when he asked for advice about molding chakra outside of his body. Now the Jinchuriki was ignoring the world while staring intently at his index finger, trying to concentrate chakra around the tip without it rotating. Naruto-kun. It may be easier if you recover from the mission before trying. The blonde Chunin rubbed the back of his head embarrassedly. Hey, I bet you're right, Hinata-chan. But I really want to get this down so I can figure out how to do something. Do what? Asked Kiba. Naruto smiled excitedly, only the most kick-ass thing ever. The others were about to pry more when the Kage walked over with his 3 children in tow. Teammate bowed as he approached, and Naruto's blue eye lit up when he realized what they were doing and followed suit while lowering his face mask as a sign of respect. The Yondaime raised his hand while saying, "Please, there's no need for that." The 4 Chunin straightened back up as the cage continued, "Thank you for your help, but I must ask, what was that pillar of light from the mountain in the distance?" Naruto suppressed a wince. He knew this was coming and tried to figure out a way to handle it while playing with his chakra. That was the result of an interdimensional seal Kage-sama. The Chunin pointed towards the unconscious knight lying on the ground nearby. Temujin activated it so we could defeat Hido, the leader of the invasion. He was drawing power from the Gelel stones contained within and we needed to cut his power. After the connection was severed I was able to kill him easily and escape with Temujin. What are these Gelel stones? Were they Hido's objective, or why your team showed up here? The 4th Hokage-san didn't flinch under the Kazekage's scrutinizing gaze and stared right back into his sharp green eyes. He had spent his childhood around the Sandaime Hokage, a man known as the god of Shinobi, and wouldn't be intimidated by anyone's mere presence. The Gelel stones were the foundation of an empire, but they were also the reason it was destroyed. The royal family fled west where legends were spread, and this army was from there. Their initial objective was colonization, but they discovered the Gelel stones were located in this area and it changed. Teammate was guarding a nomadic clan that descended from the empire and still had the legends too. I joined their mission halfway through and by chance we ran into Temujin. We followed him to their base where we learned they kidnapped the nomad's leader, and mounted a rescue operation to contain information. Naruto paused and nonchalantly scratched the side of his head before grinning reassuringly at Temari, who was giving him a concerned look. We defeated the group they sent to retrieve him and interrogated Temujin. That's when we learned of the invasion and convinced him that Hido's methods didn't line up with his professed goal of creating a utopia. After that we set out and realized the battle was happening next to the mine and assisted before moving in to destroy the Gelel stones. When we were about to enter the chute Hido's lieutenants ambushed while he went down and made the connection. Without destroying the stones there was no way to stop him. Why did you not inform Gaara of these Gelel stones? The Kazekage's eyes seemed to dissect Naruto while he answered, in my opinion he didn't need to worry about that. We had the situation well in hand, and he made it abundantly clear that the invading forces needed his full attention. Naruto didn't waver as the Yondaime pushed out chakra and increased the pressure of the air around them. You were a Chunin while Gaara was leading Sunagakura's forces on the field. I trust you realize it is necessary to share all relevant information with the commander. The blonde gave a short bow. I understand your point of view Kazekage-sama, but Gaara is also a Chunin so my rank should be irrelevant in this situation. Like him I was the representative of my village on the field, and the Hokage gave me full clearance to act in any way I deem necessary to defeat Hido's forces. Their ultimate goal was the Gelel stone, and had the situation allowed it I would have consulted with Gaara, but a battle was being fought and I did not want to split his attention. The foreigners have control of the mountain and their wizards are skilled chakra users. I acted under the assumption that they would be able to discover the mine. The Kazekage realized he wouldn't be able to get any leverage from the Konohanin. But he wasn't the only one who was in the mountain, a perfectly understandable supposition. Chunin Uzumaki. Know that I am grateful for your assistance, but find it necessary to review all parts of the battle thoroughly, even in victory. Still, for Temujin's part in this whole mess I feel he should face trial in Sunagakure with execution as the punishment. A small part in our victory should not entitle him to a pardon for his major contributions to their previous successes. Naruto set his jaw and tried to figure out a response. But how was a Chunin going to argue with a Kage about jurisdiction over a prisoner, especially in his own country? Fortunately Jiraiya landed next to him moments later and the blonde didn't need to try. I'm afraid that I must object Kazekage Ono. Temujin was originally a prisoner of Konohagakure no Sato and shall undergo his trial there. Of course, everything we learned will be shared due to our alliance. This is something that can be worked out later though, right now you have more pressing issues. The Yondaime lifted a red eyebrow. And what would that be, Jiraiya? The Sennin shrugged indifferently. Well, I passed a regiment of the daimyo's samurai on my way here. They're probably an hour away and are about to take inventory of the battlefield. Jiraiya let his eyes linger on the large amounts of timber, marble, gold, and other valuable materials littering the ground while the Kazekage's eyes narrowed. I see, but why would that concern me? They are only doing their job. Yeah, it's just a shame that this stuff couldn't be stored in an alternate dimension temporarily, then the daimyo would never know a thing about it. Wait, a seal master could get this done in 30 minutes, but where are you gonna find one of those? Jiraiya summoned a gourd of sake from a seal sewn into his vest and took a swig as the Kazekage sighed, "Name your price." The man capped his alcohol, half of what gets sealed. 20%. 45 or you get nothing. The Ondaime ran his hands through his red hair, "You can get 30% and no more. I have enough people here to get that much before they arrive." Jiraiya shook his head, 35. "Alright, just get to work. I'll have Baki supervise everything." The Sennin nodded before summoning a pair of blue transport toads, and one waited by Temujin while Kazekage walked away. Jiraiya turned towards his apprentice and pointed to the summon hopping towards the piles of loot. "You heard the man, Naruto. Get to work. When your clones are done, split everything up and give our share to that guy." The blonde grumbled and formed hundreds of cage bunshines before unsealing all of his Fuu and Jutsu material and passing it around. The bunshine got to work as Gaara walked forward. "Thank you again, Naruto. I want to talk more, but some of the shinobi that died under my command have family here and I need to tell them personally." The two Jinchuriki shook hands as Temari walked forward and Naruto hugged her tightly while saying, "Good to see you. I wish this wasn't a hello goodbye type of situation." The Kunoichi nodded before letting go a few moments later. "Yeah, I can tell you've grown a lot. You're almost as tall as me now." Naruto gave his fellow blonde another hug, "And I can still kick your ass." The girl grinned, "You want to test that?" "Anytime, Temari-chan." Naruto let the Kunoichi go and saw Jiraiya nod his head towards the road, so he turned towards Team 8. The Uzumaki noticed Hinata was glaring at the wind mistress, so he approached her first. The girl blushed as he started to approach, trying to maintain eye contact. He stopped less than a foot away and the Hyuga's mind started racing with all of her dream scenarios as he leaned in closer for a hug. "I'm glad we got to work together, Hinata-chan. It was fun." The boy let go, and steam flew out of the blue-haired Kunoichi's ears before she passed out. Naruto looked at her strangely before saying, "Does she like me or something?" It was completely silent for a moment until he said, "Nah, can't be," and everyone face-faulted before staring at the blonde like he was an idiot. Naruto walked over to Shino and shook the bug user's hands. "Glad you ran into me that day, buddy. This was a pretty crazy week." "Indeed, it was a pleasurable experience working with you for the first time, Naruto. Hopefully this will build the groundwork for future success." "Why?" "Because we have become familiar with each other's styles and habits, which leads to a smoother working environment. If this can be applied, then without a doubt we shall perform better. That is how one improves after all, taking past experiences and applying them to future endeavors." Kiba clapped the Aburame on the shoulder and cut him off. "Easy, buddy, you know that you're bad at goodbyes, so just relax." The Inuzuka walked forward and shook Naruto's hand. "It was certainly interesting. I'll tell everyone back in Konoha you said hi." "Thanks, man," said Naruto before Akamaru jumped up and licked his face, "and I'll miss you too, buddy. Hurry up, brat, time's wasting." Naruto ignored Jiraiya as he walked over to Temujin and Naragui. The Chunin leaned down to pet the ferret and said, "Later, you stupid cat." The animal playfully nipped at his fingers and the teen laughed before pointing at the night as the toad swallowed him. "Tell Temujin I said goodbye and hopefully we'll see each other again someday." Jiraiya coughed into his hand and Naruto moaned, "G0 Sennin, what do you have to do that's so important?" The author's eyes glazed over as his face adopted a faraway look. The prelims for the International Bikini Contest started yesterday. After waving to his friends one last time, the blonde jumped towards Jiraiya while mumbling something under his breath about perverts. The two walked into the distance. Shino asked his conscious teammate, "Why did you not tell Naruto you were dating Sakura?" Kiba shrugged in response, If I tell him now he'll either get pissed or won't care, and if I wait the same thing will happen, so why worry about it now?" The Aburame pushed his sunglasses up his nose and sunlight glinted off them. "That's surprisingly logical coming from you, Kiba." "Thanks, buddy." The Inuzuka stood there for a second as everyone around him started snorting, trying to hold back laughter. "Wait a second." Naruto and Jiraiya had been walking for a half hour in silence, but something had been eating away at the Chunin since they left. He looked over at his sensei while hoping he would actually be serious. It was always hit or miss with the man. "Nay, Uro Sennin." The sage cocked his eyebrow and Naruto continued, "What was with that back there? Why was the Kazekage so hostile when asking about the Gelel stones, and why did you want so much of that stuff? We both know Suna still needs money." Jiraiya stopped walking and let out a sigh before answering, "The alliance is still fragile and there is a lot of bad blood from the past 100 years of war. The Kazekage can't trust Konohagakure to act in the best interests of Sunagakure, and vice versa. Our Black Ops have significantly dropped in Kaze no Kuni since the alliance, but not all of them stopped, and I know for a fact they still have sand operatives infiltrating Fire Country. Jiraiya scratched his wild gray hair and gathered his thoughts before continuing, trying to word his answer carefully. When hidden villages form alliances, there is usually an alpha dog in the other ones. I can't recall one that had a truly equal partnership. Because of this, allies are still in competition, and the Kazekage was looking for a leg up in ours. I was trying to maintain the balance of power so the alliance can continue, and as time passes a true bond might be forged between our villages. When that happens, we might be able to think of our village's interests collectively and serve as a model for true cooperation between shinobi. The sage could see his godson was trying to process his thoughts and waited for him to speak. I don't know, Jiraiya-sensei, it seems so backwards. Can you forge a real alliance when it's built on dishonesty? Then why did you bend the truth back there? Shock covered Naruto's features as he stared up at the sage. How did you know? The legendary shinobi grinned while ruffling the blonde's hair. I'm your sensei, kid. I always know what's going on in your head. There are tells when you lie. For instance, you always speak respectfully and use fancier words. But answer my question. The blonde winced as his godfather made him feel like a child. Well, he probably wouldn't have liked the fact that we didn't really need to destroy the Galil stones or that Haido needed Temujin's blood to enter the mine. Jiraiya nodded when the Chunin finished. Right, that's something he could hold over Konoha's head in talks and possibly get concessions. It would upset the status quo and hang over future negotiations. Part of the reason I demanded part of the spoils was to get leverage. You were lying, and if he get custody of Temujin, they would probably find out what really happened in the mine. What's the other reason? A perverted grin spread across Jiraiya's face. Figure it out yourself, brat. I have a bikini contest to get to. Keep up if you can. Naruto sighed when the man took off and raced after him. The sage could run faster than he could sprint for hours at a time. He tried deactivating his resistance seals that he put on after the fight, but realized Jiraiya had changed the lock to require his chakra. Goddammit, Hirosenin, not this again. That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.